everybody, this is Hunter Williams. I hope you're doing amazing wherever you might be in the world. Today, we have a very, very special guest interview. I'm here with my friend, Brandon Amalani. He has come all the way to my house to do a podcast in person. Thank goodness. It's always so much better to do these in person, but we're going to cover a ton of ground. Today, we're going to go through Brandon's backstory and then kind of look at some of the more fundamental issues when it comes to health, all the way from, like the base biology perspective to different herbal things to even some electromagnetic slash electrotherapy type stuff that can be very beneficial. And I think obviously like you guys come to me for the HRT and the peptide stuff, but when we look at some of the things that go hand in hand with that, I talk to so many people that when it comes to their peptide journey, peptides can get them a long way, but sometimes it's not all the way there. And when we kind of look at building the whole person of like having the foundational biology, but then also all the other things that go in to your mental health and emotional health and spiritual health for you people out there that kind of jive with that. We're going to cover that today. So Brandon, how you doing?
Good. Great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah. Awesome. Excited. So good to have you here. And like I said, we're going to cover, but for the people that don't know you, I kind of want to walk through just the story of how you got here. I think it's interesting for whatever you and me are, and like kind of, it's kind of cool. Like the things we get to do like 30 years ago, the professions or careers probably, well, I know they didn't exist just because of the nature of the internet. Right. So it's really cool that we get to link up and do stuff like this, but let's just kind of walk through your story of how you got here today, because I think it's always interesting to talk to people that are working in the space and doing this stuff, like how you got here.
Yeah. And, a lot of people know me in different areas. They know me in the herbalism and Japanese traditional Chinese medicine area. And then, I'm the EMF guy, and then electrotherapy, plasma machines, PEMF. So it's interesting because my background's pretty eclectic. When I started out pretty young, if you would have asked me when I was a teenager, I thought I was going to be a musician. I was playing music when I was 10 years old and in and out of bands when I was a teenager up through my early 20s. But I was also like, when I was reflecting on, my early childhood, I was always kind of obsessed with like the Asian style martial arts, like the warrior monk archetype, the level of discipline with training and like the mind, body, emotion, like actually doing all this stuff. And that always like really, growing up in the 80s is just kind of cool. Like Bruce Lee movies, all these kind of like kung fu monks or whatever. But, that kind of carried forward in retrospect. I was reading a lot of stuff about like, okay, what are these guys doing? Like, how are they training their minds and their emotions and their bodies? And, started reading a lot of Taoist literature, the Buddhist literature, just kind of that led years down the track to like, the Greek monastic metaphysics. So I kind of started out in like the philosophy world in a lot of ways, just like, how do I like improve myself? And that naturally led me to like health and wellness in this indirect way, because I never really had any issues health-wise. And I think a lot of people get attracted to health and wellness just because, they're trying to cure something or heal something or whatever. Yeah. But, trying to make a very long story short, I was introduced to some people, and this probably was 2003 era, that were, I started working at a health food store and met some really cool people, and they were doing like the hands-on healing Reiki, back then, that book was popular, Lynn McTaggart's The Field. And then a subsect of that group that was doing the hands-on healing type stuff, and they were getting actually pretty good results. But it was inconsistent. People kept coming back to the same problems. And I just started doing this pattern recognition thing on it. And then these guys pulled me aside and said, you should check some of this stuff out. Because in the 90s, the internet was starting to like, you could actually find like information about Tesla and Rife and Prairie and all these like guys that did this electrotherapy stuff. So I was checking out radionics machines and PEMF and like just frequency generators and just all this kind of cool stuff. And to some degree, people in the SCIO machines and stuff, and people were getting some effects, but it wasn't totally, like curing or healing anything to a significant degree. It's like, the pattern underneath it was still there. So I started making the dietary connection. And where I was working, one of the herbalists that, I was working with at the time said, your how your mind works, how you are, your disposition, you really dig Chinese medicine. Yeah. So I really started looking into it and learning about like the difference between medicinal herbs and tonic herbs. And then I met a dear friend of mine who I currently work with, who's a connection to some families in Japan. So we started a company called Shen Blossom. And Shen Blossom is like truly like a small scale, small production, small batch, traditional sake extracts, traditional nutrition stuff.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's truly a closed supply chain. Like these guys are just a network of families we know. And they, you know, some of these crafts and arts with whether it's the incense or making miso goes back 30 generations.
Yeah.
So you got some serious stuff. So long story short, like studying traditional Chinese medicine, obviously they look at things energetically. You know, we exist on physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, etheric levels, according to like the Taoist literature and all this stuff. I was just like, you know, looking at all these kind of things. And since we are energetic, we're electrochemical as well as physiochemical. I was, you know, it's always been in the back of my mind, like 5G is coming, like all this kind of stuff is happening. And I really started getting into researching EMF because people weren't really explaining it in a way that I really fully clicked. You know, people had pieces and parts, but I just really kind of went down that rabbit hole really deep and, you know, found Blushield and, you know, I could go on and on, but yeah, I basically got into the electrotherapy space and realized, oh, wow, there's some major synergies. And if you think about it, we're living in a signal environment. So, you know, we're electrochemical, we're physiochemical, you know, peptides, all these kind of things have their role and responsibility and really bridging those gaps and, you know, having east meets west as far as like terrain theory, but also this new kind of understanding where we can look at the body more like a mechanic, where it's like, okay, well, we have this receptor for this chemical and we inject this compound and it has this effect. None of those things work without magnetism.
Yeah.
So I was just like, okay, magnetism is like the fundamental force in reality, and looked into all kinds of machines over time and really didn't find anything that I liked personally for what I wanted. And as far as the feel and effect, and we can get into that stuff deeper.
Yeah.
And so I just went out and found people and built my own. So that's kind of how that came to that.
Yeah. It's interesting because I love to think of things in analogies. And as you were saying that, I was kind of thinking of like, you know, peptides and hormones. If you think about a car, like I always have thought of this analogy. If you think about a car, you have the tires, the metal and everything that goes into it. That's kind of the building block, but you could have the best car in the world, the most souped up car ever, but you still have to have a driver for it. And I think if you think of like a car, you could have the peptides and hormones that are car, but then you have this like whole consciousness component to it that has to drive the car.
Absolutely.
And I don't care how much retatrutide you inject, like how much, whatever you're taking, you still have to have that component. And I think that's where this electro piece is so important, but then also to kind of like that traditional Chinese medicine aspect of it. I think a lot of people take for granted because we're like such in this cutting age of science and like all this cool stuff is coming out, but there's still, as long as people are here, there's still going to be that component to it. So I think it's interesting that what I want people to get out of this today is that for the car, there's that driver piece and we still have to address that as part of it. And what's cool, if you want to like lump it into the term biohacking, I think there's much more of a awareness and receptivity to stuff like this now, maybe than probably like 10 years ago, because we know now scientifically EMF damages us. Like we know that for a fact. You can't dispute that. There's tons of different scientific papers that show that. So it's no longer woo-woo. And now we're in this, okay, in addition to like the peptides and stuff that we're doing, we really want to address how we can mitigate some of this stuff because it could be like a hidden driver of inflammation or something that we don't know. I want to go back to like the herbal component and starting Shen Blossom. One, that's an awesome name that I think elucidates like so much when you hear that and you kind of think of that. When you were seeing people come in and you're like, okay, we're doing all this stuff, but then there's still the dietary component. Yeah. How much of that were you able to address with some of those herbal things that in addition to like the hands-on healing and stuff, like what did that take people from to like maybe where they were getting results, but they were transient to like where they were able to sustain results, maybe like using some of those herbal extracts and things that you were doing there?
Yeah, that's a good question because I mean, to me, what made sense at that time was that, you know, what affects you most as far as how you think, act, and feel on a daily basis? It's fueling, right? So we have a macronutrient aspect of just eating well and eating in balance, which is its own medicine, but medicinal herbs and things like this are basically like this ecological broadcast. They're just chemically complex signals. And I think one area where I'm starting to see a lot of people get a lot of benefit is where they're harmonizing these, because these peptide compounds, they don't have DNA. They're just like chains of amino acids and novel combinations, and they're stabilized or natural in the bioregulator sense where you're getting them from glands or something like that. but they have the signaling action. And like, I think I heard you say it, it's like running software. That's a very good analogy, right?
Yeah.
So with like hormones, that's like more of a signal broadcast where it's like a broadband. It touches a lot of different things. Like if you look at testosterone, you're like touching cortisol and insulin and growth hormone and all these kind of things. It's more complex. And I think you might see this in your world too, where, if the hormones aren't ideal and in right balance, the peptides aren't as effective because these are just like little scripts. So when we look at, if we kind of go with that computer analogy, these herbs are more like load balancers, like for electronics. So it's basically making sure that the system is stabilized in order to receive these commands and use these commands from the software you're running as far as peptides. And it does that because it's just so chemically complex. I mean, there's 2,000 metabolites in some of these herbal botanicals that actually have this signaling, and that's how DNA is expressed through plants, is through chemistry and phytochemistry. Yeah. So when we take in the DNA of plants, that we integrate that in our DNA, because we're made up of all this stuff, and that's why it's really good to eat kingdom-wise. So algae, fungi, plants, animals. We eat from all these different kingdoms, even insects in certain cultures in Asia, they will use that because they're like have a lot of, and it's kind of got the funny connotation with like the globalist agenda now, but
of the like cricket protein.
Like we, for example, we have a product called Earth Dragon, which is actually an earthworm. People like, what are you putting in this stuff? Yeah. But the lumbrokinase is one aspect, and a lot of them are standardized, but when you get full spectrum and then you tonify it with some other herbs, it has like this Roto-Rooter effect where it basically drills through the meridians and actually opens things up in circulation. If you think about how soft that is from like an internal martial arts perspective, the soft overcoming the hard idea, they could take the roughest dense clay soil and aerate it and bring it back to life and increase the microbiome of the planet. And they're one of the few animals or species that you can't take it into a lab and artificially induce cancer to. Wow. Which is weird.
Yeah.
So it's very powerful stuff if you know how to use it and how to like break it down and keep it intact and integrity and utilize it in the body. So I've kind of diverged from your question a bit, but basically what it's doing from an herbal perspective is it's stabilizing the terrain to where a lot of these things with energy work and everything, they can hold the pattern better. And of course you need minerals, you need water. Yeah. If you look at any homeopathic, it's like, what's the carrier that's holding the charge or the frequency or the information? It's salt, water, right? And minerals basically. So we need that component to be dialed in, but the herbs are, I think, very underrated in this new world of this new chemistry world, which is obviously getting people results. I mean, people are the more, and I'm super novice to it. I've been watching your stuff. I'm just blown away by the results people get, but and how safe they are, it's really kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, I think to that point too, it's like, even when it comes to peptide stuff, I always remind people, like, everyone always wants the new thing. And I could go out and be like, hey, here's this cool paper with this compound that maybe it was like tested in a limited set of humans, but one, we don't have access to it. One, it's like not at commercial scale yet. And then two, we don't really understand like the broader implications. Maybe it's not safe. Now, I think a lot of the stuff obviously is very safe that we're doing, but maybe it's not safe. But when you look and contrast that with the herbal side, maybe we can go down a rabbit hole too, is like you were mentioning those that they're like resistant to cancer basically. And so it's like, if we're integrating whatever sort of chemical pattern or DNA pattern that is with our body, if you look at the nature of cancer, obviously that's much more prevalent now, at least that we know of, than it was 100 years ago. Probably if you go back 1,000 years ago, was that even existent? Maybe not. I don't know that there's medical records to verify that, but we know most likely it was not really a thing back then. Why is that? Probably because people were more integrated with earth and with like the natural cycle of things. And I think if you look at cancer, obviously there could be a multitude of factors that go into that, but we've kind of diverged so much, so fast from the way our biology was intended to interact with the environment. I wonder if there's like an epigenetic signaling from some of those things that kind of is like a memory for the body to be like, hey, okay, like I know what this is. I know how to use this. And this is actually like signaling to my body that I'm in an environment that is conducive to health.
Right. Because we come from nature and we've evolved with nature. So of course that totally makes sense, right? Like take things from nature. That's where our natural medicines would come from. And, and that's another thing too. It's like not only our interaction with how these phytonutrients like interact with us, but you got to think about the generations of DNA passed down from plant to plant to plant and the things they've had to survive, insects, droughts. Like that's where we talk about like adaptogens in the tonic herbal systems. Like adaptogens have to adapt to super harsh climates. And the fact that they have that survival DNA and that's telegraphing to you and signaling that in your body to become more adaptable. And we can see that, happening on the physiological level. It's like a hormetic response because it's actually inducing a little bit of stress on the body, but it's beneficial and has that hormesis kind of effect. So yeah, it's really fascinating that, the DNA of plants is so missed. And I consider it kind of like a forgotten food system. It's like a forgotten food system. You think about what people normally eat on day to day. It's like the same 10 foods, mostly just dressed up with different spices and seasonings, which is interesting that the herbs are actually what makes it taste different.
Yeah.
Have a different like flavor effect, heat, cool, whatever. But it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting now because Taylor and I have a garden going and even the nature of doing that, just to like where you're taking care of it a little bit every day, you're witnessing this evolution of life take place of like, hey, we planted this 3 weeks ago and now there's like huge squash and zucchinis and cucumbers and stuff. And you realize just even in a micro ecosystem, the care that goes into that. And that's, I guess if you're thinking about it, like that's kind of how life takes place. And as I guess like the stewards of it, it's like our responsibility to take care of it. And then you think, oh, well, I should be doing the same way that we're tending the garden is like, that's actually my internal environment. Could be the same thing. And so the same care and everything that you're doing for that could be internal. It's interesting because you mentioned like the DNA side of things. When we look at bioregulators, basically in short, the way a lot of these bioregulators work is they're tissue specific. So like if you take like Cartilax, which is a cartilage bioregulator, you inject it, finds cartilage tissue, and then it goes in the nucleus of those cells and it recognizes the DNA and it's like, oh, this, and this is out of alignment. I'm going to go in and kind of repair there. And then that ends up in whatever case, in that case, it would be like healing of cartilage tissue. Right. However, that can be good, but we always have to ask ourselves, why was that DNA misfiring or wrong? I don't know what the right term would be, but like, why was that DNA expressing towards inflammation in the first place? Right. And it's good that we can use those chemical signals. It's kind of like you have like to go back to the software program. It's like, hey, your computer's not working. Use this software program to come in and tune it up and do whatever. That can be great. But I think what a lot of people don't ask themselves is why not go all the way like upstream or like rewind the clock and say like, why was that tissue expressing that way? And that becomes much more, it puts the onus on the person to have like agency and responsibility over their own life to like think like, okay, maybe you had an injury. Hey, like you can't control that, but what did you do from a lifestyle component to do that? And I think when we look at some of these things, we can actually address those further upstream than even like what peptides are doing,
Yeah, it is kind of a double-edged sword because we can use these things to, like inflammation. It's useful in certain situations. If you totally downregulate the stress and adaptation balance response, that always has to be happening. And it's easy with some of these compounds because they're so effective to just like shut down inflammation and not let it really creep up if people are misusing it or not really conscious and understanding it too. At the same time, it allows us to transcend biological boundaries in ways that we couldn't before for aging and like just having quality of life. Yeah. It's intelligent use is really the key. And that comes back to like really what this is all about. Why we're here is to develop our consciousness. Yeah. We don't take any of this stuff with us. Yeah. And it's interesting seeing the duality. Like you see people in the West with this kind of like mechanic mindset where, this organ's bad, just remove it or we'll add a new one or whatever. And Asian medicine is really unique because it's like a gardener looking at a garden. They're looking at the soil, the bacteria, the microbiome. They're looking at the relationships of the plants, the environment, all this kind of stuff like factored in. And I think there's this nice harmony of East meets West that's happening where we can utilize these tools in a conscious way as long as we understand the layering system. I think the moving forward and getting kind of to I don't know if we want to call it foundational, but getting to the electrotherapy side is really, I think, kind of the future of like how we dial this in because people they really just don't understand how their signaling is being. Yeah. I mean, we have these really incredibly multiplexed, pulse modulated radio frequencies like beaming us all the time. And that affects our voltage gated calcium channels and endogenous calcium signaling, which has all this downstream oxidative stress effects. Yeah. So let's talk about that for a minute. Cause I want to tell a story and I want to try to
walk through this in the way that in a story format that people would understand when it comes to electro stuff, because I think I get it. And I fully like do my best to practice good, what I guess would call electrical or electrotherapy practices in my own life. Obviously we all stand to have room to improve, but it's also hard in the modern environment. But I want for the person that's out there that says, I don't get any of that stuff. I don't know that I'm necessarily sick from electrical signals that are going on. Right. You know, like they don't think that may be causing any issue in their life. Sure. So let's walk through, if you have the average person that lives in suburban America, they get up, they live in a subdivision. There's probably a little 5G tower. Cause I know like in the last neighborhood I lived in, there was a little 5G tower sitting right outside my house that I could see at all times. It was kind of like a tower of doom almost, you know, if you're just like looking out your window and there's the 5G tower. But anyway, let's walk through the average American. They're in suburban America. Let's tell the story of like, maybe if they were in the same exact spot, like 150 years ago to now, what is going on to their body that would have not been happening 150 years ago? So they get up in the morning. What is that person experiencing from like a radio frequency perspective that right now they might not have any idea that's going on? Okay.
So that's a deep question. And it's basically, we're still figuring it out. That's the honest answer. We know certain things for sure. So a person living 150 years ago, they would basically, their dominant reference signal from a cellular biology and a mitochondrial point of view would be the environment. So the sun, the geomagnetic fields, lightning storms, magnetism and plasma in the environment, all of those things, including if you kind of look at everything in nature, like ocean waves, wind blowing through trees, and the ion charge that occurs with that, these are all like signals. These are all frequencies, if you can think of them that way. So fast forward 150 years, you know, we have, I mean, everything's crazy. It's like we had AM radio to start. That messed with people's physiology quite a bit.
Can you talk about that for a second? Because I transiently I think I know what you're talking about, but can you talk about when did that first come out around like World War I?
Yeah, early 1900s. They're experimenting with it, but yeah, broad distribution kind of came out around that timeline. And it's like there was, to be honest, it's hard to know what's true. There's like a lot of cool books out there and like people referencing, oh, people had like these health problems because AM radio. And then when we went to like, you know, the modern Wi-Fi era or cell towers or any of this kind of stuff, and they make these correlations. But the fact is, you know, these highly powered signals become like a signal that your body can't really ignore. Think about it like you have a radio and you're tuning into a radio station. That's a carrier signal and it's modulating a frequency of the song. And you can be on like the death metal station or you can be on the classical station, but you can't listen to both of them at the same time. So your cells tend to pay attention to the loudest, most dominant signal in the environment. And, you know, that.
So would that be, sorry to interrupt, but that would be, so let's say you have like 5 radio towers, but the one that you're closest to, you're obviously going to pick that one up because if it's too far away, you won't be able to tune into it. Like I can't tune into a station in like Pennsylvania from North Carolina, but I can tune into the one that's like 20 miles from my house.
Yeah. And it's also along the lines of like all those fields interact with you, like the signals that are coming from your new smart refrigerator, your smart thermostat, those are affecting the biology. But as far as an immune response, your immune system, like it's basically all of your cells and all your tissues and all your body is little transceivers. They're like, think of them as little radio antennas. So they're very sensitive to like subtle energy, but also these radio frequencies. And what we understand from like the highest level, Dr. Martin Paul's work, he talks about the voltage gated calcium channels. So when you're exposed to radio frequency, he was showing in his papers that you basically flood the system with 100 times the amount of calcium. And that calcium signaling has all these downstream effects. Because if you think of everything with the heart and digestion and, you know, gut brain axis, all this kind of stuff, for sleep and anxiety and all these kind of nervous system or neurological issues, it has pretty substantial effects because, and this is where people I think get confused and maybe we want to have clarity right away, is that like, well, you're telling me to use PEMF, like you're talking about EMF for healing, and then you're talking about EMF is bad. EMF isn't really good or bad. It's really all about the signal, how it's created, how it's transmitted, how the body perceives it. That's really kind of the reality of it. So when you have like a radio frequency, for example, that's going to hit the peroxynitride pathway and go down and have all these downstream oxidative effects and oxidative stress with inflammation and stuff like this. But if you use a coherent EMF, beneficial EMF, that's going to go down the NRF2 pathway and have all these kind of like healing benefits and qualities as far as like, you know, stabilizing these field gradients around all the mitochondria in the cell. So you get that nice proton exchange, you get the ion channels like fluxing as they should, and you're able to get electron transport to happen properly.
Yeah. It's interesting. And I by no means claim to like understand this fully, but when you talk about the voltage gated calcium channels, basically, if I understand that right, does that mean that we're kind of like flooding calcium into the cell? Doesn't calcium act as kind of like an inhibitor of magnesium absorption in a way? Is that the right way to say it? Or is it?
Well, I wouldn't say inhibiting, but yeah, they're kind of like, zinc and copper, iodine, selenium. There's these mineral marriages. So if you have a surplus magnesium, it'll buffer excess calcium.
Right.
For sure.
So to the point being is I think like 80% of people are deficient in magnesium anyway, just because it's not in the soil. It's not like it was 150 years ago where we're getting it through everything. And so I'm always telling people, they can't sleep, they can't do this, whatever. Obviously, probably EMF plays a part of that. Sure. That it's like bombarding the cells. Maybe you have a smart meter right outside of the house next to your bed that could be bombarding you too. Yeah. But which we'll probably talk about that at some point too. But point being is like, okay, even if you just took magnesium, no peptide is really going to address a magnesium deficiency in you that we know of. You can't take 30 bottles of BPC and think that you're going to get any more magnesium from that.
Melatonin disruption.
Yeah, that too. And so I think when we look at that alone, the fact that it's just like disrupting the body's ability to use magnesium that we might have, or that we need to like over supplement maybe way more than a person would have 100 years ago to actually get the magnesium into the cell to be usable. Could be another way that people, that alone, like, I think if you look at magnesium as probably kind of, and again, I'm not an expert on this, but like maybe like an electrical conductor within the cell of like helping facilitate these electrical reactions. If someone doesn't have that, I think they're going to be very irritable, and they're probably going to have anxiety, and they're going to be not in a coherent state. And so it's like, one, you take the fact that we have all this EMF bombarding us. Two, people are deficient in magnesium anyway because of the food and everything. We don't have it. And so for someone that's not like over supplementing with magnesium or taking more than you probably think or whatever the RDA of magnesium would be, you're probably going to be in a default state of anxiety because of this electrical signal that's now affecting those VGCCs to be able to, even just that one mineral alone, be able to use in the body.
Right.
Leave everything else out of it. And so I think when you look at that for someone that like, maybe it's not skeptical, but just like doesn't understand this, those signals are having this certain effect on the body, to which then even that one mineral of magnesium and the difference between magnesium and calcium and how that's interacting could potentially have maybe catastrophic consequences in someone's mood, which would then lead them to be more stressed out, which would then lead them to probably have health issues if they're stressed out all the time. And then you have the stresses of life and everything. So I just want people to understand that like even that one aspect alone is enough to drive it. And then we have all these conflicting things on
it's
top
all connected, right? Yeah, all the downstream minerals and everything.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, so we have all these signals. Let's take that person, they wake up. Can you explain to us? Because I personally, like, I don't even understand this. So we've got, like, I think of the average person that wakes up in their bedroom. We've got a few things. We have probably their cell phone that's like right next to them. Hopefully it's not. Hopefully your cell phone is out of your room when you're sleeping.
Or at least in airplane mode.
Yeah, at least in airplane mode. But let's say they've got their cell phone next to their bed on their nightstand. They've got Wi-Fi going in the house. They've got obviously the cell signal, so that we've got like the 5G probably if they live in a neighborhood that's like coming to them. And then we've probably got some Bluetooth going on. And then we probably have whatever electricity is going on in the house, maybe a smart meter, maybe like whatever electricity is there. Can you explain just for people? Because I think in most people's head, even if they know it's bad, they kind of like lump all those into one. Is there a difference in how some of those things are affecting the body based on the nature of like what spectrum they exist on?
That's a good question. I think there's definitely nuance. However, I think the net effect is accumulative because we can't really separate everything out. I know we kind of, this reductionist scientific method, we like to look at studies and we like to look at things where it's like isolating this one factor, but really like there's all this other stuff kind of going on. Like for example, like looking at blue light before bed, and what that does to the body, that's a type of EMF. It's a photonic signal to the body. That's different than what's aerial, which is the Wi-Fi, which is different than, transients on the sine wave coming in your house. So really I kind of put it into different buckets because I have a multi-pronged approach. Sorry. And
say that 10 times fast.
No kidding. So because like everybody like knows me and associates me with Blushield, but I know it's like more multifactorial than that. So I have like this 3 tiers. So actually it's 4 if you include the nutrition, because like when you're talking about magnesium, there's adaptogens, there's minerals, there's also these other things that you can actually do, and actually generating your own electromotive force. That's why exercise is so critical. Whether that's qigong and slow moving and like you're building and doing standing meditation, or you're doing like hard weightlifting, or any of that stuff's good. Running. So the systems I look at, I put it into different buckets. So you have the aerial type EMF. So that's, think like satellites, cell towers, your Wi-Fi router that's like broadcasting like multiplexed frequency stuff out. And then the thing that we added recently was the Sine Tamer. I've noticed a huge difference with that. So Sine Tamer is the only true transient suppression device on the market. And it uses a frequency attenuation model versus the capacitance based dirty electricity filters, which you may have seen, where you plug these things all over your house, and it's basically just capping off. So you have the sine wave that's 60 hertz coming into your house. And then what happens is you have a computer, you have a refrigerator, microwave, TV. All these things are basically have power, switching power supplies in your house. All these things add transient or noise on the line. And what happens is that builds a field effect into your house. And what the capacitance based filters do, think any type of Stetzer filter, Greenwave, there's different brands or whatever. But the idea is you plug it into their house, and what they do is they shunt that excess transient onto the neutral line. And that creates another magnetic field problem in most rooms that people aren't really measuring for. So with Sine Tamer, you just hook it up to the panel. And what's cool is it like basically takes those transients down to 0 for the whole house, anything that's connected, because it's like one big circuit. And that happens on all lines. So line to line, line to neutral, line to ground. And it solves a lot of the transient problems. So when we're simplifying things, we're talking about proximity. So you have the aerial stuff, you have the stuff inside your walls. Because if you look at your house without all the drywall, it's like an electromagnetic cage. Yeah. And these are radiating energy out. And if you have all these transients riding the line, it's not going to be great for your health long term. So we take care of the close proximity stuff, take care of the aerial stuff. And then, what I've really been into the last few years is just like the electrotherapy, because we can induce a charge onto the body and create a massive amount of coherence that like has a sustained effect. And then you're basically letting the body ring out its own natural harmonics, and you're correcting the ion gradients and these voltage gated calcium channels in your and polar lipids to where your body is more adaptable within these fields. So let's say you don't have the EMF protection side, you're using the electrotherapy, you're actually more robust, resilient, and adaptive when you go into these fields, if that makes sense.
So if I'm understanding it right, using electrotherapy actually could be a way to lift weights for your own electric field to be more resilient to the stress of the bombardment from what we're getting from the external environment. Would that be like, I know that's probably like a very simpleton type.
It's a good
analogy.
way to look at it. Yeah. It's a strength, because it is putting a stress, and there's different types. So my favorite electrotherapy stack is like the Arc that I created, and then Therify, which are inverse technologies. One's a dielectric accelerator with charge collapse and based on plasma, and the other one's plasma based on capacitance and magnetic flux. So you're creating a pulsed magnetic impulse wave. And this is where we got to really discern like what's the difference between most PEMF on the market is like resonator. So it's a computer brain, and what they do is they do a specific sine wave specific to that different machine. That could be a sine wave, a triple sawtooth wave, square wave, trapezoidal wave, whatever. That's the carrier. And then they modulate the frequencies. And the problem with that is there's a lot of edge noise. Mm-hmm. And to just simplify this for people, like you're not a passive, there's this thought, and to be fair, it kind of makes sense when they talk about the body's like a battery, because we act like a nonlinear capacitor, or a dielectric medium. So where, it kind of, the analogy makes sense. You charge it up with this, like you're a battery, but you're not a passive battery. That's not really how it works. We're tightly regulated. And if you knew about all the oscillatory systems that are managing just homeostasis constantly, it would just make your head spin. If you knew how many trillions of processes that were happening. So we're not like adding electrons in the traditional sense. The way I like to think about it is like the body does the work. I mean, if we're real, like any peptide you put in any hormone, you can only do so much. It's like you cut your body and it knows how to heal it, right? It's got the code. The DNA is there, but it can only be expressed properly within certain conditions. So that's where terrain theory really is the foundation of all of this kind of stuff. And we just really have to understand that, the body's doing the work. You're just giving it signals.
Yeah.
So what type of signals are we getting?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about, because I think this will be helpful as we like walk through all of the different like electrotherapy. Can you explain to people what terrain theory is and like how that would be in layman's terms different from like the traditional method of thinking when it comes to like how science would approach understanding the I guess probably the mechanic style view of things.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously science recognizes terrain theory and there's different, just like with any theory with physics that I've studied, it's bizarre. Like there's still a lot to learn and nobody fully like agrees. And we're just still figuring stuff out as we pressure test stuff. I mean, if we're doing real science, we're like pressure testing and figuring out like how this evolves and everything. But the basic idea is that the terrain, we're a self-organized system. So the body, the DNA, the code, whatever you want to call it, is basically self-regulating all the time. And a lot of times it's what we put in our way, whether that's diet, lack of training, like our attitude, like can affect our physiology, make us more acidic and all this kind of stuff. So, you know, the terrain basically will, if we take care of our physiology, give us everything it needs. I mean, that's the premise of Shen Blossom. Shen is the third treasure of Chinese medicine. It translates to like heart or mind or consciousness, has different, depending on the context. And I was thinking with that, you know, if we give the body everything it needs, nutrition, herbs, techniques, tools, and understanding and conscious awareness, then that allows your Shen to blossom and become more aware. So terrain theory simply is the idea that like the terrain makes the difference. And when it gets out of balance, that's when we experience sickness and things like this.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because I think that was really big around COVID. That's when I was like kind of first introduced to that concept as I was on my journey of like just my own healing journey and then eventually helping people and stuff too, is you can kind of look at disease, whatever, as, okay, you have the body and then there's like these foreign invaders that are coming to the body, you know, like a virus or a bacteria or whatever. And those foreign invaders, like your body's just going along and it's perfect, right? And then those foreign invaders like attack you and you got to be like shielded from it. Whereas I think like terrain theory would be more of like the body is actually already whole and complete. And
you already have that stuff in you.
Exactly. Like you have the viruses and the bacteria in you.
It's interacting all the time.
Exactly. And it's your resilience to those things. It's your frequency, or maybe that's not the right word, but like your consciousness kind of dictates how you will. I mean, sure, I've gotten like the cold and stuff, but if you look even with like COVID or whatever, some people got very, very sick. Other people, for me, like nothing really changed in my life whereas like it seemed like the world was melting. I'm not trying to be like desensitized to people that may have had bad experiences or whatever. But I think when we look at that, is like like you said, the body is a self-regulating system. And sure, there's lots of tools that we can use to improve it. And I think in a lot of cases are even mandatory, whether it's from like the Chinese medicine side of things with herbs, maybe even to peptides to like get us where we want to go. But when we look at those things, it's like heal the internal environment first. I think a lot of people have this unnecessary fear of the external environment. Right. And they don't realize that like your priming of the internal environment could potentially like affect how that external environment could potentially like go to the idea of hormesis. It could actually be the best thing for you. Like those stressors could be the best thing. I always tell people, and we'll go back to this, but I think of this with testosterone because I've seen this in so many people's lives. I know it's happened in my life. A guy or a woman on testosterone, two similar events could take place with the same guy on or off of testosterone. And that same event could actually be something that propels him to success or crushes him to failure. Right. And it's his ability, because of what testosterone can do in that specific case, to cope and handle the stress that will allow him to succeed or fail, not necessarily the stressor itself. Like how come some guy can throw up, you know, a bench press of 300 pounds and do it 10 times, and another guy, it would crush his chest if he tried to take it off. And it's the driver, you know, to go back to like the car and the driver, it's like the driver and the ability to handle that. So I think when we look at, when it comes to some of the EMF stuff, a lot of people, like I self-admittedly have been in this place in my life where it's like, oh my goodness, I have all of these things around me. I've like, what am I going to do to mitigate the fact that I'm getting bombarded with EMF? And is it hopeless? Like, is it completely pointless to do? And it's like, it's like, well, you could think of it that way, or you could say like, hey, I can actually prime my internal environment to actually potentially not even be affected those things the same way that like someone else who's not doing that could. And I think that's what's really cool about what you're doing is you're not saying that we have to go be a Luddite and live in a cabin in the woods, although that could be cool. You know, it
has its virtues.
Yeah, it has.
These guys in definitely Japan, they're living on high mountain spring water and doing martial arts at like 60, 70 years old. They're pretty tough. They don't do any of the modern stuff, and it's pretty impressive.
They're definitely healthier than most people, and I think stronger and more resilient with no testosterone and no peptides and none of that stuff.
But environment.
Yeah.
it's a different thing. You know, if somebody like struggles and has low hormones in our culture, especially with the, you know, the toxicity and the you know, weather modification, aerosols, just every little aspect that's hitting our physiology and interfering with endocrine signaling. Yeah, I mean, it could just be changing their life. So it's like the same thing. Is it hopeless? No, you can, you know, be well cared for and well monitored and take care of your health and hormones and use these things, and it changes your life.
Yeah.
You know, same thing with EMF. People think it's hopeless. Oh, well, I got all this stuff everywhere. There's actually things you can do. You can create a dominant reference signal like we do with Blushield. You can remove all the transients in your side wave with a Sine Tamer, and you can get on an electrotherapy device and charge yourself up daily, where it's like, it's just profound how many like benefits across. It would just be just a huge conversation in and of itself for that alone, just the electrotherapy side. Yeah. So there's things you can do.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Blushield. I'll tell my own personal story. I've had Blushield for 3 years. I had Blushield before I think you even knew who I was, just because I was a fan of it and had found it. And obviously, like for years, I've been into like trying to mitigate EMF stuff. You know, it's interesting. I went from 7 years ago, I was living in an apartment in more of like an urban area. Literally, it was like where you go outside and there's like 5G towers. There was a 5G tower plus a main power line with like huge power transformers. Plus, it was like a new apartment building. And so, like, honestly, like my sleep at that time, even with doing everything that I did, was never the best. Like I was always like doing everything to optimize, and it was never the best. And I think it also too had the fact that like in an apartment building, you have like all these Wi-Fi routers. Like if you think about it, like you're in like a cube of Wi-Fi routers that are all sending probably a bunch of electric meters and whatever. But anyway, I've had Blushield for several years. I definitely noticed like right away, there was like a difference in the sleep in my house. But anyway, fast forward to today, we have this awesome podcast studio built in my house, in, you know, my office and whatever, which is really cool.
It is very cool.
Yeah. But I will say, going from like where there was nothing in the office other than the fact that I have Wi-Fi in my house and then I had my computer hooked up, to now there are 5 or 6 different overhead lights that all have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi from them. There is like a power box in the closet behind me that has computers and everything running at all times. It actually has a fan in there to keep the temperature down, because like when those things run, when they're all running, they run hot. It like automatically will kick on to make sure that it doesn't overheat or whatever. Point being is, if there was ever a place, plus the cameras, plus like the hardwire of the cameras and everything, and the Bluetooth that's probably coming off the cameras that it's not even connected to anything, but I know those emit Bluetooth too.
Oh no, what are we going to do?
So exactly, like fear, right. But I will say, once I got all this set up, I was like, I got to bring my Blushield into the office. And even those first couple of days that I didn't have it up here, because we had it downstairs in our bedroom, which I'm still sure it was like affecting here somehow, because it's still in the same house. Sure. I noticed an immediate difference just in working in here all day from having the Blushield. So to that person, maybe they don't have all of this equipment. What was going on there? And again, I definitely would say it's not placebo effect, but if I say something works, give me more of whatever works. But
even if it's placebo.
Yeah, I was going to say, if the placebo effect works, well, give me more placebo. Right. I know that's not the case with Blushield, because obviously we have verified data to back that up, and clinical trials and everything.
Well, that's why I did it, because I was getting all this far out feedback from so many people. I'm just like, because nobody really knew about it in the West. Like it originated in New Zealand. And, you know, I just realized like I actually met one of the co-inventors, and we became friends, and he just sent me a bunch and try it out. And I subjectively knew similar stuff. And I had a young daughter that was teething at the time. Like, so I wasn't actually getting any more sleep, but I wasn't as fatigued in the morning as I was prior to introducing it. And it just, what caught my eye is that they were testing it. And this isn't clinical in any way, but they were doing grassroots science on, you know, in chicken farms, and tying Blushields around cows, and just noticing like some, you know, obvious changes in the milk, and like all these testing parameters, just boots on the ground science, observational. That caught my attention, and that's what got me into like trying it. And then when I saw my own results, and then, you know, started bringing it in here, because I was like, people need to know about this. Like, I've looked at all kinds of pendants, stickers, cards, you name it, like organize.
Me too. Yeah, I used to have it all.
And I figure stack my odds in my favor. I just get all these things, and if something's doing something and it's compounding or has some kind of multiplicative effect, cool.
Yeah.
But Blushield kind of really blew my mind, and I got so passionate about it. I was like, people need this in the West. Like, how can I help? So, yeah, that's where we did blushield.com. But for so many years, I would get all these like testimonials via email and people calling us, and I was just like, how is this little crystal photonic light thing actually doing this stuff? Like, we need to put this on the chopping block. Like, I want to know, is this the best placebo ever created, or is this actually something that's like real deal, you know, scalar technology? And so we did the clinical trial, just everything kind of lined up. We met these doctors who were passionate about it. One of them, this guy named Tom, he was super passionate about it. He helped organize a lot of the clinical trial because it's an independent review board certified. I don't think a lot of people understand where it comes to EMF protection. You can pay doctors to write white papers and you can have theoretical papers, but to do like an actual independent review board certified clinical trial and get like statistically significant data that's accurate is like pretty, and have genomic changes.
Yeah.
Like the voltage gated calcium channel, we had hypermethylation on 206 GPC sites. Wow. It's crazy that like even the people at True Diagnostics were like, this is crazy. Like what's going on with this thing? It took them back. So yeah, that's a long way of saying like, I had to test this stuff in like the most rigorous way I could find, because a lot of people are using like, you know, I'm all about muscle testing, kinesiology. People are using electroencephalographs like the EEG, you know, brain stuff. But, you know, the problem with that is that it doesn't show a field effect. Like I could put an EEG on you, program a Z plot to say red is bad, green is good. And then I can have you close your eyes. I can have you lay down. I can take you through a guided meditation and change your brainwave state. Your brain's always in flux and always changing. So I didn't want those like short-term parameters. I wanted stuff that's harder to kind of like manipulate by any means. So like genomic changes, that's a big deal. When you get the methylation and you show the far upstream voltage gated calcium channel signaling changes in real time across 100% of the participants, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And so my understanding would be, for instance, like in this room, because I have a Blushield on here and throughout the entirety of my house, basically what's happening is that like all of these things are emitting a frequency that then my body is picking up and then interacting with in some way. But with the Blushield, whereas like if the Blushield was not here, that's what's going on. With the Blushield, it's not like suppressing the Wi-Fi. It's not like telling that Wi-Fi like, hey, go down, or like the cell signal to go down. It's actually creating a new frequency to which then my body syncs up with, but it's also changing that so that there's always kind of like a new one that's coming out of that then my body picks up. And it's like, hey, today it's this. I don't know if there's like a time frequency that it changes, but then like, hey, it's this. And then next week it's this. And my body's always syncing up with that rather than all of the negative, I guess the way that we would frame them as negative that's coming off the devices.
Yeah. So it's acting as a dominant reference signal, and it does have that proper phase shift where it's got broadband unsuppressed harmonics to where your body never gets used to it. So it's got two of these laws of nature. So you got randomization, where you can call it chaos, and then it's got order. So it's got the phi ratio mathematics. Everything is, if you look at, there's no real straight lines in nature that naturally occur. Everything's like curvilinear, linear, right? So yeah, that basically becomes the radio station that your body preferentially tunes into. And if you look at Dr. Bruce Lipton's work, for example, biology belief stuff, when they were doing Petri dish tests and they put, you know, something toxic on one side and then beneficial on the other side, and they took human, because obviously human cells are like, tuned into human physiology because you can manipulate with your mind, just your focus alone. So they took everybody out of the room, put cameras on it, and in every single case, it demonstrated the natural biological intelligence that the cells would move towards what's beneficial and away from what's toxic. So preferentially, our dominant reference signal is nature. We need to be out in nature. And it's silly to think that we can create an artificial device and, you know, bring nature into the house in the same way. I liken it to like, I've been experimenting for years, and I have a very sophisticated whole water system, like trying to replicate spring water as much as possible. But it's silly to think that I can do something in like 12 feet of filtration system that could replicate the hydrological cycle and the, you know, all of those aspects. Yeah.
It's probably kind of like you're never going to replicate nature the way that it was intended, but it's probably the next best thing. It's kind of like if, you know, like if you're going to watch TV, you could watch something really negative or you could watch something positive. You're still watching TV, probably better to be in nature than watching TV. Yeah. But if you're going to watch TV, like at least watch something positive that like would create a positive emotional state in you.
Yeah.
Then would create, exactly. Then would create a negative emotional state. And I think that's to the point of like, for what I do, Yeah, it could be like the mountain man that just goes chop wood, carry water all day. But I know for me at this current incarnation and the time that I'm doing, that I have a calling that I feel dedicated to because I know what it does and that it helps people. And that's what I am motivated to do. And a lot of times that's going to require me to be at a computer, unfortunately, for an extended period of time for the day. And so for me, it's like, aside from, maybe I guess I could go sit on my computer out in my backyard, grounded and stuff. But even then I'm going to run out of battery at some point, and then it's going to be 100 degrees in the summer and my computer will melt and everything. And so the next best thing is for me to have a Blushield so that when I'm working, I don't get brain fog in an hour from the 30 devices that are in my office to where I'm actually able to sustain it. And I will say, practically speaking, for me, I did notice that of like, I'm not someone that I would say is nowhere near like EHS, like electromagnetic hypersensitivity. It's like, some people like, they just can't handle it.
The bell curve, right? Some people
like some people like that far in to like where it's like they have to live, completely far away. But I will say for me, I can kind of know like, okay, within an hour, like my brain's getting fried from working versus like I can sustain like a very good work pace without having kind of that like bombardment and like getting like headache or just like brain fog, or I wouldn't even say it's a brain fog. It's more of just like an irritation almost. Yeah. That feeling where you're like, I've got to get outside. Like I've been inside for too long. I've got to get outside because your brain feels like scrambled almost. Yeah. And I would say the Blushield it has made that so much better to the point of like, again, it's the next best thing.
Yeah, and it's very subjective too, because those of us who are intellectually honest about anything EMF protection are just like, well, this could be a multitude of things. Like, there's no real symptom that's like you can connect anything to anything. And I've never been like, a hammer that sees everything as a nail. I know it's more nuanced and complex, generally speaking, across physics, across health and wellness, herbalism, peptides, all this kind of stuff. So it's like it's easy for people to get stuck in like, oh, I have ringing in my ear, Blueshield's going to fix it, and then the ringing's still there. It's like, well, there's 5 other things that could be like causing this, like kidneys and like hydration.
Do you have a lot of concussions? Because that will probably cause ringing, to which I don't know that anything at this point that I know of will fix it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's crazy. So like, just people need to understand it's a piece of the pie. And I think that's why I've got so much notoriety in the space, because I don't think anyone is really covering this like 10, 15 years ago. Like there were, there's brands and people putting out great information and educational content now. But I mean, we were looking at all these areas of health that make us whole, but we weren't like, the biggest, newest pollution is electromagnetic pollution. Like it's a pollution that never existed previous to AM radio. And like, we finally are starting to have some level of like, okay, we can do something about this to where it's multifactorial. It's not just like one product or one thing. Of course, everything we've been talking about with like, if your hormones aren't balanced, if you aren't using tools specifically for your regeneration, like peptides or whatever, if you're not like taking your tonic herbs and stuff, you need to have all the pieces of the pie to be like whole, in my opinion.
Yeah. One of the that's one of those things too, is like, we don't really have a choice in this day and age. Like we don't get to choose. I mean, probably at a soul level, we did obviously choose to come here at this time, but in terms of doing exactly what we're doing right now, we don't like, I don't have a choice that there's like 5G towers up around me. But I do get to choose like how I'm going to create the internal environment to make my body resilient to those things. And I think that's where it's like something as simple as having a Blushield in your house, as they'll say, like, as for me and my family, that's what I will continue to do, because I've seen firsthand the benefits and I know it's something there. This might be a little woo-woo, but yeah. Do you, I mean, we're going to go full woo-woo, but
any rabbit hole is cool with me.
Yeah. Do you think, can you tell like when you walk into someone's house that, like, let's say you go into a house without a Blushield or one with a Blushield, is there like a different vibration or frequency in that house because of the nature of all the EMF bombardment that we're experiencing that you can almost kind of feel, maybe not right away, but like after being there for a while, just subjectively at this point, like knowing like, hey, I can kind of feel like, when you walk into a room, it's like, ooh, I don't like how this room feels. And maybe it's like the design, maybe it's like actually electro frequency or whatever. I know for me, the reason I ask that is because like I can kind of feel, and again, maybe it's placebo, but like when I walk into my house, like knowing that there's a Blushield in there, it just, something feels more calm than it would be without that. And maybe that's too also like a lot of intent and prayer and things like that that go into like kind of creating the environment in a house. But I've always just wondered that because, you walk into some buildings or some houses and you're like, ooh, this feels like, with no like, things that are like apparently obvious in front of you, like, ooh, this feels like kind of like a chaos energy, versus like, oh, this house kind of feels like very zen and calm.
I do feel distinctions like that. And it's interesting because if you look at like paranormal research, for example, like you can actually just let's take EMF out of the equation. Like if somebody's like ruminating in a house and they're just negative or sad for a long period of time, like natural materials like wood will actually absorb that and people will just feel off. It's like if somebody's having a bad day and you walk in, you just are, if you're in tune with yourself, and of course you're a lot more optimized than most people, when everything's operating properly and everything's in balance with all of our physiology and our emotions and our mind, and everything's working as one chi, one energy. That's like true qigong. That's energy work internally. We can actually pick up on lots of different things. So like even the feng shui of places is like, people don't really understand like how important like your layout is. And, you know, you can take it or leave it, of course, but you know, a good example is that like how the subconscious mind works. If you have like a cactus in your house, for example, that's considered like poor feng shui in a sense, because not that it's bad, and cactuses are beautiful, but your subconscious mind always thinks danger when you're around it. So every time you move by it, even though you might not be consciously thinking about it, your subconscious mind is protecting you and moving you away from that. So these like subtle cues, having rounded corners versus like, you know, jagged angles, like these right 90-degree angles, that's how energy flows. Color schemes balanced based on you and you as an individual. All these things are things you can pick up in a, like from a chaos environment. But I think it's important to know, again, not looking at everything as a nail. Like, yes, EMF for sure. You can feel if there's like chaotic energy or if there's harmonized, like good energy. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned prayer, because your thoughts, your emotions, and your beliefs that are repetitive affect your environment, and people can pick up on that kind of stuff if you're sensitive, because we're in tune with each other. We're like in transceivers, we're antennas, you know, humans are naturally share unconscious information all the time. Yeah.
Well, maybe this is a rabbit hole, but we were talking about at dinner previously about architecture. It's funny when you're talking about like being a kid, actually there was a weird phase when I was a child. I wouldn't say weird, but I used to want to be an architect when I was a kid.
Really?
Yeah. And I was like 7 or 8 years old because I loved like doing Legos, and I would like draw like floor plan stuff. It's also probably too, because my dad was involved in the construction industry. So I was around that a lot, and I loved like looking at buildings that were being built and stuff. Didn't materialize. Well, I guess I was a real estate agent. So in some level I did end up working with buildings.
You're building people's bodies up.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's funny too, because if you look at, and people have said like the Myers-Briggs personality type is not like, there's nothing to that. But for me, because I've taken those before, the one that I am is the INTJ, which like if they classify that, it's like the architect. And so just the way that I think about things is more, I like to like piece things and synthesize things together in a way. I love taking like abstract things and then like condensing them into something that is of structure.
And thinking in systems. So
yeah, exactly. Of like, okay, blocks. Like how do we take all these like crazy things that are out there and then put it into a system that makes sense and that flows and that is understandable. We were talking about architecture and the buildings, of how much that probably plays into our own biology. Like you were saying, of like rounded corners versus sharp corners. I remember when Alex was here at our mutual friend, Alex Kickel, he was actually talking about that in the body of the cells. Of you can have these like right angle cells that are actually more, I don't know if it'd be like inflamed cells or unhealthy cells that tend to have that, versus like a healthy cell would be a round one. So I think it's one of those things that's funny, is because like as above, so below. So if you go all the way down into the body, you could probably have cells that are expressing towards right angles, then all the way up to like what we interact with in our external environment that could be like signaling those things that you know, to the idea of feng shui, of like having an environment, of doing your best to create the environment that is conducive to health at every level, whether it's like using testosterone and peptides all the way up to like, what do I do in my house that like actually allows energy to flow through? And I think that's very big. And I think it's one of those things we kind of take for granted and maybe put on the back burner, but I think it's as important. I know it's as important as whatever peptides or supplements I take to be able to do that, because it's, again, it's the conductivity, or like how we allow those things to be conducive to whatever energy we want to go out into the world. Yeah. And I think what's interesting, I think about this, and I know this is not everyone's experience, but it's kind of our experience, is we use this like medium of video and audio to put out ideas for stuff. And when I first started doing that, I was like, maybe someone will listen to me. I hope they do. You know, I was like, am I wasting my time doing this? And to now, it's like, I'm very, very blessed and fortunate to like have people that respect what I say. And I realize now that there's a lot of what I go and ever like say, whether it's like in a video or if it's just me like going out to eat or something that like maybe like I end up seeing someone that I know or whatever, there's a lot behind the intention of what I do. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is how powerful that intention of like me sitting down, even when I'm filming a video talking about the peptide sequence of blah, 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 and what it's going to do mechanistically in a clinical trial, you know, whatever, the intention behind that reverberates in a way that you can't necessarily, like at least right now, measure in the way that we would typically measure things. And I think when we look at that intent and like going about like how we want that expressed in our lives, that's a very big thing. And it's interesting because what I feel like I've noticed, and I would be interested to see if you've noticed this too, humans are adapting. Like we have all this technology that's like changing crazy fast. Like if you would have said 3 years ago, the stuff you could do now, it's like crazy what you can do. Yeah. With like AI and stuff. But humans are actually like, I think sometimes we like don't give ourselves enough credit. What I have noticed that people become much more intuitive of picking up the intention I have behind doing something over video and audio that maybe 100 years ago, like humans didn't have the capability to do because that wasn't something that was a daily facet of our lives. And I wonder if you've noticed that like humans have been able, I think people are much more apt to discern like my motivation behind doing stuff through video and audio, maybe than they would have been able to 10 years ago.
Right. Because it's a different modality. You have, you know, visual, audio, you have more versus like, you know, just radio broadcaster or just talking to somebody in person. Like this is great because you get a lot more communication than just what's said. But I think you're right. And that's kind of the silver lining to all the fake stuff of the modern age, all the AI, all the artificial everything, and people just being deceitful and just nasty. It's like your real stuff kind of stands out. Yeah. So if you work with integrity, that's my whole mission. And what I'm here to do is just like get people like the foundation, because I believe once you have all the stuff we've talked about today dialed in, that's where you start going to self-mastery. I mean, there's all this kind of like historical evidence of like yogis eating levels of mercury that would kill other people, but they biologically somehow transmutate it. Or doing just like these feats where they just reach such a level of mastery, you're beyond danger. And that's what like tonic herbalism from the old school Asian style is about. It's like health beyond danger, where you're actually taking these substances, not for today, not for tomorrow, but like for weeks and months down the track. And, you know, it's really incredible. So yeah, all the fake stuff of today, like I think people pick up on your authenticity and your integrity because you're just being you. And, you know, people that are being fake, it's kind of obvious, you know? Yeah.
Well, and I say that in not a way to virtue signal, but almost in a way that it's even more incumbent upon people that do create content or whatever. And you don't have to be creating content. Like you could be just going about in your daily life. Sure. That you have the intention behind doing it right. Cause I think people have been able to do that in person, but I think they're a lot better now at like sniffing it out over the internet waves than they probably were like 10 or 15 years ago.
And everybody should be skeptical. Like that's what I'm not here to try and convince anybody. This is just what I found out with EMF and electromagnetism and herbalism and like exercise and stuff. It's just, you know, to me, a lot of these things have repeated so much that it's like kind of self-evident at this point, but I'm still learning. I'm still growing. Like I'm just like anybody else. I don't have everything figured out, but I just try and be multidisciplinarian because I think we are also, historically, you know, people have been so focused on one thing. They're like a cardiologist or they're an immunologist or they're in there, and which is great because you can go really deep in one thing, but you lose context as far as how everything's connected. So I try and look at all these pieces and parts in that regard.
Yeah. I like to think of kind of to your point of doing that. And obviously we have, to a certain extent, you have to kind of like specialize in stuff because otherwise it'd be hard to get anything done. But then to another extent, I try to view like everything that I do through life as a way to I guess like elucidate what I actually do. So it's like if I help people with like peptides and hormones, how can even like the fact if I like go to the grocery store and like some interaction or whatever experience I have at the grocery store actually apply to that, because it actually like brings, like you said, the like the old like Renaissance man concept of like this perspective that you wouldn't necessarily have if you were just like so focused in that. And I think that's what I like want people to understand too, is like we can get so caught up in like the HRT and the peptides and stuff. And what's interesting for me is to see like a lot of people, whether it's like in our coaching group or just people that I get feedback from or whatever, is to me, like the questions that I get asked are almost like indicative of like how well of a job or good of a job I'm doing at like teaching concepts to people, because I'll get people that are like, hey, I'm taking this, and this. And I'm like, that's like actually like exactly what, if someone came and paid me to tell them what to do, they're already doing it.
Right.
And so to me, I was like, okay, then that means like I'm doing like a decent job of educating the market on that. But then it's also too, it's like, how can we bring in those other things to be like the blind spot to those people that maybe they have, like sometimes there's like not one thing I can tell. Like, I'm like, look, you're doing all the hormones, you're doing all the peptides. There could be something. Is it like a life stressor? Is it potentially an EMF stress event that is negatively impacting you? I mean, I talked to Peter Cowan, who you introduced me to. Yeah. Why are the 49ers, the San Francisco 49ers, hurt at a way higher rate than any other team?
Definitely anomalous.
Yeah, say it's the power substation next to the thing or not, it's real data that's there. And so like if the 49ers do the same peptides and whatever and training and whatever that the Seattle Seahawks do, but they're next to a substation, that could be the one thing that's a blind spot that they never even perceived in their awareness that could be affecting them. And I think when we look at whether it's things like the Blushield or the Arc PEMF and these things, they could be sometimes to those people that might not feel like maybe some of the stuff is working, but like feel like they're not getting the results they want, could be like the blind spot that comes in and be like, oh, maybe there is this electrical issue in my life that I've completely left unaddressed. And it's just kind of like festered for a while. And now I can address that. So that being said, let's talk a little about the PEMF. And again, admittedly, I know very little about this, but I know I go to like conferences and medical conferences and biohacking conferences, and there's always like 5 or 10 different companies there that have stuff. One, can you explain to us, again, we've already talked about it a little bit, just like in summation, like how that's working on the body, but then also too, like and I know you hinted at it a little bit, but like the distinction between the Arc device and then what some of those other ones are doing, because you can get like I think it's like a higher dose, maybe one of those like little mats, for like $200 or something to sit on, versus something like this. So like, what would be the distinction in terms of what's going on in the body with those?
Yeah, there's different distinctions. Like there's different modes. So with, power output is one an impulse wave, which is a nanosecond transient. So it has a specific slew rate and bell curve or whatever on the oscilloscope. And then what you see like with these kind of mats, like I mentioned earlier, is like a resonator type device. Like it's computer brain, it's modulating a signal. And what I found out a long time ago was that, the body is not very linear in that way. What I was talking about with edge noise means if you produce on like say you take an oscilloscope and you produce a perfect sine wave 10 hertz. So it's going 10 cycles per second. So that's a transverse electromagnetic. When you're doing that on a carrier signal into the body, you got a lot of impedance here. So the body is like modulating and oscillating at different frequencies throughout the entire system, just regulating your autonomic nervous system, regulating these ion gradients, each mitochondria is like a magnet almost. It basically has to separate charge in order to allow proton gradients to work properly and get the electron transport chain to happen in the way it should, and keep your mitochondria healthy. So when they're doing these kind of like sine wave modulations, the idea is that they're using a sympathetic entrainment. So it's sympathetic resonance. So it's like, think of a tuning fork that are tuned exactly the same, and you hit one over here and you bring it into proximity, and this one will sympathetically be resonating with it without even touching it, because it's in the field effect. So the idea is like, if I put 10 hertz in, the body's going to start resonating at 10 hertz. But again, you got like these densities in the tissue, you had the electromagnetic gradients that are already happening and being stabilized in the body. There's just a lot of misnomers with like PEMF, just like with grounding and some of these other things where people think they get sold a narrative, and we're human, we like linear stories and we like logic, and if we can follow a flow, but really the mechanisms are usually quite different than what people are kind of sold as like, oh, here's the problem, here's the benefit, here's the solution. Yeah. So with an impulse, and why I wanted to create something fully analog is like, I wanted to, as pure magnetic flux as possible. And I wanted to take what we learned with Blushield as far as randomization and have the magnetic flux to randomize. So on any setting on this, you have two basically diodes, which is a mechanical modular spark chamber and the plasma discharge. So it builds up in the capacitors and it discharges a magnetic flux. And that impulse transient, which is anywhere from 190 to 210 nanoseconds, really, it basically stimulates the polar lipids in the body. So because you have a hydrophilic and a lipophilic section of the polar lipids, basically there's always a net electron deficiency. And when you stimulate it with a magnetic flux, it basically gives the body this micro massage. So you don't have to think about frequencies. Your body can ring out its own natural harmonics. And I use the analogy of like ringing a bell. So let's say you have a huge church bell and you just strike that thing. It's going to resonate its own natural harmonics of frequencies. And then you might have rust or dust or things that are incongruent or not supposed to be on that bell. It'll break those bonds. So like things that shouldn't be in your body aren't really in a comfortable space, if we put it that way. So we look at the bad word, the C word. We look at these other things like microorganisms that are more opportunistic. It really tends to restructure and energize the dominant organism, which you are, so you can more self-regulate immunologically. So it has like all these benefits. Like the most well-known benefits are obviously from, the bone healing world. I mean, most of this type of PEMF is cleared for bone healing and bone
Isn't
density.
it FDA approved for actually bone healing? There's like different devices. Yeah. So it's like it's obviously not like we're talking about some woo-woo stuff, but this is like actually FDA approved technology in a lot of cases for certain instances.
Which makes sense because the bone is piezoelectric. So you induce a charge. But really where I'm interested in it is like the mitochondrial health and like making, affecting the polar lipids. So these membrane gradients are stabilized, because that's really what we're working on, these ion channels that allow all this stuff to work way better. So you get what we call it is magnetoporation, where you're getting this kind of like sulfur, like organic MSM, like the green MSM that we have. It makes cell walls more permeable, so nutrients can be taken into the cells and, waste can be removed more efficiently. So you get that temporary magnetoporation that happens at the cell membrane, to where you can detoxify a lot more efficiently. You get and it basically resets redox potentials. I think Alex was the first guy to actually test this. Like he would talk about like taking stuff that causes him to hyperpolarize. And it was really interesting because he would get on the Arc afterwards and it would totally like calm him down, because it's like a reset, which is really cool. So it sweeps the cells, and because it's randomized, your body never gets used to it. So it's twofold. Your body doesn't get used to it, and also you get the depth of field penetration. So if you're trying to get the stem cells going, you get in the bone marrow, a lot of magnetic fields just bounce off the body again because that impedance. So like the resonator type devices are just a lot more problematic and add a lot more edge noise and more incoherence to the system. And this is really where I've people are starting to use the terminology now more, which I'm happy they're making that distinction, but it's about coherent EMF and incoherent EMF. So you can have a therapeutic device that's very incoherent. A lot of these Tesla coil style devices with the triple spark gaps, man, they're just like noisy, like creates all kinds of problems down the track. But it's like in the electrotherapy space, and it's sold as like a healing tool. And people that don't really know the physics of it, they'll be around it and be like, whoa, I feel it. Which
feel something,
you feel voltage, because you're like, it's spinning off all these crazy, what the Russians called weird electron, I forget the actual term for it. The Russians knew about it best, but when it's close to metal proximity, it'll spin off these electrons that are like cationic, and basically will just
it's like a bullet that like bounced off the wall and comes back at you.
Yeah, it's pretty inflammatory overall, but you get a stress response, of course. And that's one thing I ask myself on the EMF stuff, not to get back on the Blushield stuff too much, but that's one thing I ask myself a lot is like, is this hormetic? Is this like what if like my Wi-Fi router is actually like making me stronger? And it turns out it's really not. I mean, if you look at sperm motility and DNA corruption, all this kind of stuff, it's not a type of stress you want. So there's good stress and bad stress, of course.
Yeah. It's not like, it's funny and I'm quoting off of memory here, so maybe this isn't correct, but like with sauna use, it can be like hormetic stress where it like temporarily suppress sperm, but then you actually like get this like rebound effect to like over time where it can be beneficial, but it's like in that window that it's suppressed and then it'll come back stronger. Whereas like with the Wi-Fi, it's kind of like the difference. Like there's no hormetic stress with someone beating you up with a baseball bat. Like that's not hormetic in a sense. Like you're just kind of getting hurt, and there's the body can recover if you let up on it.
Well, it's chronic exposure. You're not living in the sauna.
Exactly.
You're chronically being exposed to your Wi-Fi router.
Exactly, because the Wi-Fi router is constant in most cases. Actually, is it the best practice to like unplug the Wi-Fi router at night? Or is that actually just not even worth it because it's...
I don't. I think, if you can. The issue is like, I have a security system that requires it. So that's where we get into trouble. The more we become dependent on this stuff. But, I have multiple systems and I use electrotherapy every day, the dual stack. So I think for most people, if you can do it and you don't need it, absolutely. The kill switch idea. Have you heard of the kill switch, what people use? came out
I
several
feel
years
like
ago.
where it's just like one thing they have, and they just like at night you shut it off and it shuts down everything.
Yeah, you can basically have this switch and controller where you can shut down, to the bedrooms or whatever.
Yeah.
One thing people don't realize is most codes that the neutral line and ground line always have to be active. So you're still getting the transients, you're still getting stuff kind of affecting the room. It's better than nothing for sure. You can feel a difference. I've experimented with them in the past, and like there is a calm to it. It just, don't be fooled. It's like not shutting down everything, because we're still connected to the electrical grid and the neutral line is still active. And that's where we're seeing a lot of the transient issues. And this goes beyond biology too. Like people are going to have issues with their computers. Like if you don't have some type of suppression technology, there's just LED lighting is semiconducting lighting. This is like throwing tons of transients on, like people are going solar power. Solar systems are some of the worst as far as like transients on the sine wave going in your house, as far as creating like an incoherent field for the biology to fight off and burn immune power to.
Do you feel like that whole thing, no disrespect to people that have solar systems or
not at all.
drive Tesla cars or whatever, but do you feel like that whole thing is kind of like a Trojan horse that ends up causing like we're sold the bill of goods that that's like the more eco-friendly thing to do. But if you look at it from a health perspective, like I can't imagine, to like your point, if I had like a bunch of solar panels on top of my house, what that would do to be radiating me that like actually in most cases financially doesn't even net you a benefit, because of like, it might like at first, but like over time, I think in a lot of cases it doesn't. Mm-hmm. Do you think like a lot of those things are causing, and then you could talk about like the electric cars too, of like, I've heard really bad things about those basically like irradiating you when you're driving around in an electric car. Like, do you think that's a Trojan horse? Is like going to have a lot of problems and like cause a lot of health problems for people in years that we don't realize?
Well, any technology is going to have potential problems for sure. And with the cars, it's definitely more, I mean, you got to understand most cars are like onboard computers.
Yeah.
You have flat screens, like electric or not. So that's what first, they're most dangerous when you're charging them. So definitely do not sit in them. If I can say one thing about electric cars, don't sit them while you're charging them.
Yeah.
They're going to be the most dangerous in that respect. So yeah, I mean, everybody kind of gets the idea of solar. Like it sounds really cool. Like you can harvest, power from the sun, but most people still don't realize, a lot of the stuff is still coal burning and nuclear. Like, we're feeding back into the grid. So, there's probably a way that they can optimize that down the track. But overall, it's speculative. And I've heard good arguments on both sides. So speculative to me.
Yeah, it's one of those things, I guess. It's the old, you can't see the forest for the trees. Like we will never know. Now, all we can do is just like on a daily basis, just do our best to do it. With the Arc device, I've been using it because you sent me one to try, and I've been loving it for the week or so that I've had it leading up to this when you sent it to me. I would say for me, practically speaking, I mean, I guess coherence would be, and I know I haven't had that much exposure yet, but like there's definitely more of a coherence. Like if I do that in the morning throughout the day, there's more of a calm effect. What I would be really interested to see is kind of like Alex was saying, so we're using, like the people that listen to this, they're like using peptides and everything, probably getting a good therapeutic effect in a lot of cases, hopefully from the peptides. However, when you were talking about like a stem cell migration and everything and like cell membrane permeability, let's just say, because I think of TB500 with stem cell migration, or you think of like SS31 for mitochondrial function. I wonder how much, okay, so like if you're taking SS31, how much does layering in the Arc device add to the, like how good it works because of what we're doing from, like you said, like a redox potential and then also a cellular health perspective, which is cool because I think if you took someone off the street that's never done peptides, never done anything like that, your typical like average American that's unhealthy, they're going to get good benefits from using the Arc.
Absolutely.
But what I think is really cool is where you probably get this like 1 + 1 = 3, where you're doing these things that are kind of like mechanistically peptides, like inducing a state, versus this would now is like changing the electroflux nature of what's going on with the cells that then makes the cells even that much more receptive to the peptide itself. So it's like, if I use this and I'm taking a microdose of a GLP and some SS31, it's going to work way better for me than it is for the person that's not.
I mean, you just said it. I mean, it's really taken it's yin and yang. So you got a chemical signaling, and then you got the electrical side, the membrane, the electrical potential, and the inner membrane and the outer membrane. It maintains a -70 to -90 millivolt potential usually. If you're restoring that and you're creating order and you're restructuring the electron transport chain, essentially, yeah, everything's going to interface and dock at receptors better. You're going to get more clearing of inflammation. You're going to basically get better circulation. I mean, obviously circulation, if you crank that thing up high enough, it's super potent. Yeah. So you're getting a lot of like nutrient delivery to just other tissues in the body, like muscle tissue and stuff like that. But we're working more neurologically and autonomic nervous system with the ARC. It's really kind of getting the body into a relaxed parasympathetic state on one level, but you're also changing so many things. It's like the clotho of electrotherapy. Not saying it increases clotho, not saying any of these things about like, it's just an analogy that like it touches so many things upstream that it affects the entire body from a high level downwards from an electrotherapy standpoint.
Yeah. I really like that analogy because we're going like so far upstream that we're affecting kind of the root, like there's all these different modalities that you could look of like where they're addressing things along the value chain. And then you're going so far upstream that it's improving everything, which I think to your point, what I'd love to talk about for a second is that parasympathetic state. And so what I see with peptides is one, sometimes people with peptides, they're in a severe severe sympathetic state. Right. Like their nervous system is just fried totally. Yeah. And to be honest, sometimes shooting up retatrutide may help you lose a little bit of fat, but it actually could be worse potentially because of what it's doing of like increasing energy expenditure and all those things. So like in some cases that could be potentially damaging to that person almost more so than it's helping because again, the internal terrain of that person is not going to respond the same to as someone that's just chilled out and takes it. And it's like, hey, now this the fat is melting off. Maybe it doesn't even work for them or doesn't work as well because their nervous system is so overloaded. Then too, some people when they're new to peptides, they're so scared of them. I've seen this happen to like, whether it's like psychological or it's the actual body responding, their nervous system is so stressed and they're so scared of taking peptides and they take them. And then all of a sudden they have this like bad reaction. And it was almost like they were so stressed to begin with. One little thing, like, and then they were primed for something bad to happen. So can you talk about like how it's helping people? Cause I think even people on peptides, you could take all of the, like the C-Lank or whatever in the world. And some people don't have a reduction in anxiety and this like improvement in their nervous system. Can you talk about like what it's doing there to help bring down maybe an overactive nervous system to like make someone more chilled out?
Yeah, there's the nervous system component. There's also the detoxification component. Cause like, remember, like we were talking about, like if peptides are these scripts, you first need all the global stuff to be working well, like the immune system, cardiovascular system, the hormonal endocrine system, all these things need to be kind of dialed in. And sometimes, it's better for people to kind of do the, get the diet dialed in. And with ARC specifically, you're just expediting everything you're doing. All your supplements absorb better. Your hydration is better. I mean, you're just electromagnetically, you have better electromagnetic hygiene because even if you don't have all the EMF protection, all these other things that I recommend, you're still getting that charge and that residual charge. You become more adaptive and resilient over time in regards to your electromagnetic environment. Yeah. So we have to work on all these levels, but when somebody just wants fast clearing of inflammation and, the bone density and tissue remodeling and all this kind of stuff, I mean, PEMF, especially this impulse type that's like high potency, high magnetic flux, and it's randomized too. Again, it's all about the specific, how you're delivering it and what it's doing. I mean, I can't really say enough. I mean, it's just complementary. And it, at the same time, it's not where people start. I mean, you start with diet and hydration, you start with exercise, then you kind of layer these things in based on what you need. And you always got to have to work on the foundations. ARC can help you get there, but usually it's for people that are, already more advanced. And I think it does have like when you're talking about 1 + 1 = 3, it does have a multiplicative effect. It's not just like a 5% enhancement. That's where I see about, I like photobiomodulation. I like all these different technologies. Like a huge percentage of them though, it's like getting you that 2 and 3%. And if you're an athlete, that 2 or 3% means a lot. Yeah. But how do I create something that's like a Swiss Army knife for most people? Because everybody's way different, has all these different needs. That's why I originally like landed on magnetism. Like we're creating other stuff and we're going to make some more electrotherapy instruments that are more, I guess, surgical, but this is just so broad band. in the biology that like basically everything you're doing with it works better because of your magnetic signaling.
Yeah. With that device, how often should someone do it? And is there diminishing returns? Like, could they do it like 5 times a day, or is it like 2 or 3 times a week? Is there like a sweet spot or even like a minimum effective dose? Obviously, you probably want to do it more than not do it. But I'm just thinking for all the doctors out there that have clinics, because I know so many doctors or people that own clinics or wellness centers or whatever, that it's like they're always looking for that next thing to improve for their members or their patients. And they might be doing peptides or stuff, which can be great. But I'm just thinking of like, if I had a clinic and I had all these people getting peptides from me or doing cold plunges or red light or whatever, what like one up or like a leg up I could give people. So is it something that I guess someone could do like once or twice a week and still get like a decent benefit that they will notice improvement subjectively?
I find it's kind of like you do a bolus load. So you're probably doing it every day for the first couple of weeks that you're using it. And I find my sweet spot is 2 to 3 times a week.
Okay.
So that's where I've landed after a few years of using it now.
Yeah.
It's only been out to the public, gosh, 1.5 2 years maybe now. Like we have a chiropractor in Kansas City who's a friend of ours who was the first clinic to actually use it. And she's running people in 30-minute sessions, generally speaking. Minimum effective dose, I'm 5-10 minutes, you'll feel really great.
Yeah.
You don't really need a ton of it. Do that twice a day. Usually morning and night. We suspect, and from what we've seen, the charge lasts, 3 to 6 hours, depending on the person, their biology, and how mineralized and everything they are, or whatever, and hydration. And that's important. If you're using this machine, you got to be hydrated because it's going to move lymph, blood, and chi like crazy. So it's super important, and not to have metal on you and stuff like that. But yeah, I would say, you could get away with like 20 minutes a day, 20 minutes twice a day. Usually when I'm doing I do a session 2 to 3 times a week. I'll do PEMF Arc at 20 minutes and then do Therify for 20 minutes. And you always end on Therify because it's a totally different modality. It's like this one's like chiropractic and body work. This one's like acupuncture.
So would you do that? Could you do it in the morning or the evening, or is it like if you did in the evening, would it be too stimulating to make? Okay.
Usually it regulates what the body needs. If somebody's overactive, then you're talking about the autonomic nervous system being super high anxiety type person, it'll actually calm them down. It'll kind of take you the direction you need to go because again, it's resetting all this kind of stuff with getting this micro massage, and it's kind of like a chaos therapy. You're putting your body into chaos with this magnetic flux that's randomized. The body wants to hold on to patterns. And we find that with people like with anxiety, for example, it's really interesting, like tertiary effect that we didn't actually expect when we were doing this. But, because the mind can't find a pattern, it's not like a lot of PEMF is. It's like kind of all over the place, and the amplitude and everything's kind of like fluttering or whatever. It's like makes them a little bit more anxiety, but it's like just a few minutes in, they just parasympathetic and they're just like chill and they feel more relaxed, for hours afterwards. It's really kind of a bizarre thing.
It's probably like the old trope and like weight training or whatever of like, you got to like change up the stimulus. Like if you did squats every single day, you're going to get results, but eventually like the body's going to adapt to that sort of stimuli versus like you do front squats and then you do kettlebell swings and then you can do like hamstring curls. And so it's like, they're all leg work, but you're getting different stimuli that will then grow the body in a way to like where it's not getting accustomed to that stimuli to like where you can, I know in this sense, like plateauing is not the right word, but it's like a different stimuli that creates, like, I guess what I'm saying is like, you can do that for 5 years and you're still going to get those results because the stimuli is different to like where your body's not going to adapt to it.
100%. And that's what we really figured out with Blushield. I mean, nothing in nature is repetitive.
Yeah.
If you think about it, like your body's always changing, cells are dividing, passing on different information and, adapting at the same time and interfacing with all these things in the environment. If you associated a frequency with all these things in the environment, it'd just be like kind of mind blowing. So yeah, we have to have these principles of nature built into any technology that's going to be useful into the future, whether that's EMF or electrotherapy. It kind of has to, and we're trying to get the body to do more of its own work. And that's another thing. Cause like, that's one of the double-edged sword things about peptides is like, you're kind of basically taking responsibility away from the liver and the body in certain ways with like different compounds, just by virtue of what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's just it. So, that's why we still need the stress and adaptation with whatever we're doing. I think that's what's smart about the way you teach this stuff is that you're, teaching people to cycle and like, minimum effective dose stuff. That's really kind of keeping it within this biological boundary where it's like useful and taking people to the next level that they can't really get to on their own, maybe in some cases, but then, they're able to kind of utilize that in a safe way.
Yeah. Well, I think too, the way, because I just kind of thought about this with the Arc and stuff is, with peptides in a lot of cases, like a lot of people think I'm always on like 30 different peptides. Like, oh, you must be having like this crazy stack or whatever. Yeah. And it's like, actually I'm not. I have tried pretty much every peptide under the sun that's out there at some point. One, just to like see how it works and then like be able to have feedback. So like when I'm commenting on stuff, I always stray away from like commenting on things that I don't necessarily know. Like, believe it or not a lot of people do that. They'll talk about things that they like have never experienced themselves. But, if you think about like peptides, I think one of the best way to think about them is a catalyst, meaning that, you're talking about like the liver and some of these things, like, there's peptides like retatrutide that can help melt liver fat. But does that mean that you want to keep drinking alcohol and keep doing the things that got you to have all that liver fat in the first place? The liver fat is there for a reason, and it's almost always because you create an environment that caused that. Not always, but almost always. And so it's like, okay, if I take retatrutide, I take 12 milligrams a week of retatrutide, but I'm continue to drink 4 nights a week and eat fried food all the time and live a sedentary lifestyle and be chronically stressed and never be in the sun, like never do the foundational things, you're probably better off with the retatrutide than not. But what if you could use it as a catalyst? It's like, okay, I'm in a bad spot right now, but I'm going to use this. It's going to help expedite the healing process. Because in a lot of cases, like someone probably could get rid of fat off their liver through diet and exercise alone. I would imagine that would be possible. Like over a year or two, you could probably maybe not get all of it, but like knock a chunk. Yeah. However, if you use the peptide as a catalyst of like, okay, I'm going to take this peptide now, but I'm also going to start to change the things in my lifestyle. All of a sudden you get this enhancement and like non-linear result curve of like how fast everything starts to happen. And that's what you see for people that do it right is they can use that, then they exercise, diet, do all these things. And I kind of think about that with something like the Arc is it can be a catalyst for someone that like maybe in like a super inflamed state or whatever that's like experiencing disease. And it can kind of be a catalyst, like get them going. Then all of a sudden now you pull this person out of the hole. They have more energy to exercise. They have more of a coherent field to which like they now are actually like from a spiritual or fulfillment perspective, like, hey, I'm here right now and I can do something with it better. Rather than like feeling so hopeless or whatever, because you feel better. And if you feel better, then all of a sudden like doing all those things that may have felt like so burdensome before all of a sudden become like, hey, like I love exercising. To me, like exercising is the best part of my day, but I know for a lot of people, that's like the worst part of it. Like to the fact they have to exercise is like, oh my goodness, I gotta do this again. Yeah, do this again today. Whereas like maybe a little peptides, maybe a little Arc device enhancement, all of a sudden now it's like, hey, I'm kind of in a good mood. I'm gonna go out in the sun and take a walk and then eventually like lift some weights. And then you know what? Like maybe I'm not going to drink the beer or eat the pizza or whatever it is. I'm going to like eat a little bit healthier food because I know it's going to make me feel better. And all of a sudden you take someone in a year, they have all these things that have kind of like stacked and compounded on themselves to where they were catalysts that got them there. And I think about that is like, when we talk about like that electrical nature, you take all the peptides in the world, but what if we had a catalyst like on that side of things that was going so far upstream to be able to create that. And then all of a sudden someone can look back in 6 months in their life and they're like, man, how did I get here? Because it didn't seem like as hard as I thought it would have been.
Right. You probably see that a lot with, I imagine with like hormones or people like you can pump somebody on TRT and growth hormone, but they don't get transformational results because they're not living the lifestyle and doing the things like, and but it can be a catalyst to get into that lifestyle, and it's interesting with the electrotherapy. I'm just so blown away at like how it affects so many people in such different ways. Cause when you're letting the body ring out its own natural harmonics and you're creating charge potential, that's the body utilizes it as it sees fit. And everybody has different priorities. If you think about like repair mechanisms, immune system, detoxification, building tissue and being in an anabolic state, wherever you're at, it'll kind of like allow your body to have that surplus charge potential to do that better.
Yeah. Yeah. You talked about the Therify. So you mentioned the Arc is kind of like the body work, the chiropractic. What is the Therify? And then how would that be different? And then also potentially like synergistic with doing the Arc?
I mean, it's super synergistic. Like I'm saying, it's like an inverse technology. So really what people need to understand, they can research and look up is the magnetodielectric nature of reality. So there's this kind of inverse geometry where, you basically have inertia, right? You have this, which we call rest point. So it's energy at rest is inertia. So we're kind of wired upside down and backwards when we talk about, energy in nature. For example, if like you detonate a bomb and we're sitting there witnessing it and you feel the heat, you see the explosion and be like, wow, that's a ton of energy because I can like feel the heat, I see the light. But that's spent energy. The actual energy was the potential at rest. And then it was like, you got this chemical cascade that allowed it to explode. It's important to know that, we have space and counter space. We have the use of potential energy and the potential energy itself. So when we talk about the magnetodielectric with the capacitance-based stuff, so with a PEMF, we're creating charge, and that charge disrupts into a magnetic flux, and most of the electricity stays more towards the transformer, so you're getting a magnetic flux that's stimulating the body. The Therify is creating a dielectric potential, so you're creating electrostatic charge, and it's a biphasic system, which this means you're basically spinning these columnar waves or these longitudinal plasma waves in one direction on this side and then in the opposite direction on the other side. And as they phase collapse into the center point, which is usually where you are on the bed, it basically goes superluminal, which is faster than the speed of light, theoretically. And that's basically going into counter space because we're creating like 500,000 volts of potential with this air core transformer. It's like, where's it going? It's first law of thermodynamics. Energy can't be created or destroyed. So like, where's it going? So your body acts. So his original idea was kind of cool. It's like, how can I put somebody in a plasma tube? Like think of an MRI machine and just sliding somebody on an acrylic table and then they're in this plasma tube. Obviously it has limitations like on a lot of different design levels, but also shipping and all this kind of stuff and then cost. So his idea I thought was really cool is like, well, why don't we just make the person a capacitor in the circuit? Because the body is a dielectric medium and it's, acts like a nonlinear capacitor. So what's happening as these plasma waves are vortexing towards each other and creating charge collapse, your body is connecting and basically completing the circuit and you're creating these longitudinal compressions and refractions are like doing a similar thing basically to the PEMF, just from an electrical side, not the magnetic side. And you're getting the scalar potential. And it's the only device on the market anywhere basically that I've ever seen that can demonstrate time reverse wave effect in real time. Meaning you can take a bulb from a hardware store, put it on the table, and you basically see these compressions and refractions in the gas. And you may have seen it on the website, but it starts at the center point of the bulb and moves back in the opposite direction from where the photonic energy was coming from. That's considered a time reverse effect. So it's basically reorienting and restructuring the plasmoids in our body, all the what makes our cellular makeup. And, it's not going to time reverse you into being like a baby again, but basically it brings your cells to the highest level of coherence or order. Yeah. So you talk about potentials with autophagy and, just basically like genetic potential. Like a lot of scientists before him were talking about like using these phase conjugate systems to actually restore genetically modified seeds back to their original state.
Wow.
So if you think about that.
Yeah, which would be like the reversing the damage that was done from like what nature intended to be to what it now is. So if I'm understanding this right, like a normal light bulb, like if you had a tube fluorescent light bulb.
Yes.
And that was hooked into like a normal electrical circuit. If you were to like have the slowest motion camera possible, when you turn that on, it would turn on basically like the bulbs inside that. The ones on the ends would come on first because like they're closer to the circuit. And then eventually.
Are you talking about LEDs?
Yeah,
You're talking about gas bulb. Okay.
Well, yeah, either one. And I'm asking. So like, cause you were saying it like starts in the center and then goes out.
Yeah.
Right?
This is a gas effect. So the gas in the bulb is being ionized.
Okay.
Remotely.
So, and that would be different than if if you just had that bulb plugged in, would it still be the same way or would it be different from the...
Like if it was plugged in and on with the Therify there?
Yeah.
Because you're getting the 60 hertz modulation. I mean, what's specific to this is like the Tesla coil and the driver, which is the amplifier, is basically modulating that specifically using phi ratio integers. So it's Planck length times phi ratio integers. So you're getting this frequency cascade of perfect phi ratio geometry. That's how you create that charge collapse. And if you look at phi ratio, not a lot of people really understand that, but it's the mathematical proportionality of everything in nature. It's like, that's why we have a sense of beauty when we see like, these spirals and these kind of like fractal geometric shapes in nature. So he uses that as far as code to modulate the plasma to be able to create the charge collapse and the scalar potential. So you're creating a scalar field effect, time reverse wave, and you're creating a longitudinal, it's not photobiomodulation in the same sense, but it's like the plasma acts as like a fractal antenna, so that it's a directional like antenna to and the real energy is coming from the driver and the Tesla coil itself, and the plasma is modulating it because it's very stable. Like these noble gases and the specific combination of noble gases or what's acting as a directional antenna, which allows it to do some pretty special stuff.
Yeah. Can you explain to people, and I don't know either because I'm not as well versed in this stuff, what Tesla, I guess like what the definition of scalar energy would be, and then like Tesla coils would be, and like how those differ from like what we would traditionally like in the like mainstream schooling of way, like how those differ from whatever like the like mainstream energy source would be. And that's probably a loaded question, but
it is, because just trying to simplify it for people. When you talk about scalar potential, okay, so a scalar, like here's one aspect. So there's magnetic, electric, scalar. We're going to talk about what people mean when they talk about scalar energy, and then we'll talk about what a scalar actually is. So scalar, 39 miles is a scalar. Okay. It's basically when you add a time vector, like 39 miles per hour, then you have this time vector. It's no longer scalar potential. It has a phase direction. So when we look at like a scalar potential with what people are talking about with like Lieutenant Colonel Tom Bearden's work or something like that, they're talking about these biphasic signals. So you have let's say a sine wave on this side, sine wave on this side, intersecting, but perfectly phase canceling each other. That creates this like 0-point field effect in phase cancellation. And what we kind of understand from a physics perspective, and this goes all the way back to Maxwell's equations. So Maxwell, in his original equations, he factored in for these scalar potentials, which are these nodes of compressions and refractions within a sine wave. Oliver Heaviside came along and said, this is like totally unusable. We can't really use this kind of stuff, even though the math checks out. Like, we're going to simplify this. And he created the 4 equations that basically made our entire electrical grid that as we know it today. But scalar potential has always kind of been in the background. Tesla was fascinated with it. Lieutenant Tom Bearden, he basically got Tesla's papers allegedly, and kind of he wrote, and a lot of his stuff makes sense. If you read his papers and his formulas and like what he's talking about with scalar energy, it's been used in multitude of ways now. It's just like not really well discussed in mainstream literature. So what people are talking about with the healing or beneficial, and again, scalar is just like EMF. There's no good or bad. You can use it to be destructive or you can use it to be constructive. So Therify is using constructive wave interference with that system. And when we talk about scalar potential and you're canceling out, the principle here to know is that like, well, what's happening? When you go to absolute zero with two energy sources that are collapsing back into the dielectric or the counter space, if you will, how that affects it. And this is where we can't get away from the ether conversation. So there's this interconnected medium that's antecedent to psychophysicality. So it's abstract, like outside of and before psychophysicality. It's the potential that everything comes from. So when we're stimulating everything back to like that source, if you will, it has an interesting effect. You can think of it like DNA. So you have let's say a million volts, and you just create a scalar potential and like collapse it to zero and like they call it faster than speed of light. We can get into the whole electron rabbit hole if you want to talk about any of that kind of stuff. But basically, it's like DNA in the sense that like once that's disturbed, you perturbate the ether or whatever the medium, whatever dark matter, quantum foam, whatever fancy new term you want. That potential basically recodes and redistributes and restructures everything. So think of it like a source code. So the idea behind scalar energy is you create that charge collapse to affect and churn the ether and stimulate it to where it reverberates back into and restructures and reorients and reorders things. And that's really kind of like the scalar potential aspect of like the Therify, why you need the two opposing vortexes to create the charge collapse. So you can create the time reverse wave effect, and then you can restructure genetically modified seeds. You can restructure humans. You can put somebody's picture in the Therify and work on them non-locally because it's their genetic, it's direct to their genetics, and everything's interconnected. Yeah.
So
I know it's kind of like,
well, yeah, because this really got me thinking, and like maybe we can go to down the road. The first thing I was thinking is like, was it like when I had my Nintendo 64 and I just like, you're playing Super Mario and you hit the reset button, and then like that whole instance of whatever Super Mario was in that time is gone. Yeah. Like it's gone, and then you restart the thing. But then I was like, well, what is sleep? So how do I know? This is also, fair warning, this is totally deviating from anything related to peptides. So if you don't want to hear it, turn it off now. So how do I know when I woke up this morning? So I was sleeping. Yeah. I don't know where I was when I was sleeping. I'm not saying that that's a 0 point, but I don't know where I was. I fell asleep and I woke up this morning. How do I know when I woke up this morning that like every memory that I have was just some program that got installed upon my now I know this is like, we're like doing a thought experiment here, but like, how do I know when I woke up this morning that all those memories of my past and whatever, like where were those? Because like I was gone, you know, like if you put a camera on me, I was like obviously in my bed, but my consciousness was either like in the dream world or just like non-existent. And to this day, I don't know that like scientifically we could explain like where is that along the spectrum. And so when I think of like that, the nature of that technology to what it's doing to like you were saying, it's like collapsing it down and then coming back. It's like almost, is it like like we know that like sleep is probably like reorganizing the body for health, right? Like we have all these things, like all these processes that go on that are like reorganizing, that we wake up the next day and it's like, hey, now it's a new day and we're starting and whatnot. So is that almost like away from probably quantum's not the right word, but from a much like an outside of the physical 3D paradigm that we would typically like see the lens of the world through, a sensory paradigm of like sight, smell, whatever. Is that like a reorganization of the molecule itself, which would have come from consciousness or like whatever, like source superposition down into the physical as a way that it like goes back to that and then comes back reorganized into this? Or is that completely wrong? And I'm just like,
well, you're getting in the nature of consciousness itself. And you know, it's not an either or. We're connected to it all the time. Your mind is inside your body, but like the most advanced understandings from my point of view is that our mind is actually also outside of our body in this kind of like, think of it like a cloud, you know? Mm-hmm. And your Nintendo 64 analogy was kind of pointing in the right direction. It's more like if you have a lot of apps, tons of apps going on your computer, sometimes you need to defrag it and go back to zero and like reset, and everything kind of comes back and works better because it reorganizes from the base. Okay, let's start from the beginning again. Yeah.
Would it almost be like the hardware only has a certain amount of memory that can run all those apps, to which you would then need to like defrag to be able to run clean?
Well, nature's memory is pretty infinite from what it seems like, as like as far as what we can tell. But yeah, it's very like the mitochondria, like our consciousness. It's very much like a magnet. There's a north and south pole, but those are just like, if you cut a magnet in half and separate them, there's a new north and new south. They're not like actual physical things. So think of it like a ham radio. It's like if I had a ham radio here and I was getting this carrier signal, like is the signal in the radio? If I destroy the radio, signal's still out there.
Yeah.
Right. So our soul so we have an immortal self and immortal self. We have dream state. We have like waking state. So this is where we kind of look at physics and be like, as above, so below, like you were saying. It's like, okay, everything's fractal, seemingly fractal and recursive, meaning these patterns repeat in nature. So, you know, there's things that we can, you know, with a reductionist scientific method, reduce down and look at like, hey, this is something we can crystallize, burn, stamp, and put under a microscope and like keep it still enough to actually look at it. But then there's a living quality of like things like dreams and emotions, like, you know, scientifically prove to me that you love your dog, or any of these kind of things that like really built a lot of society, the emotion, like all this kind of stuff that drives us. Like, why are we here? What's our mission? What's our purpose? And to me, it's like our thoughts and mind are tethered to our body, and they kind of exist inside our body, but our consciousness is completely something separate, which we're all part of the one big thing, in my opinion. And of course that's getting philosophical and stuff, but it's interesting that you bring that up.
Yeah. Well, I think about that a lot. Not publicly, but you think of this idea of like, there's the reductionist view of like consciousness comes from matter, which would be like you have a body and then like your body creates like all these chemical reactions to which then you have this experience, versus like the matter is created from consciousness. So you had that before and then that condenses down into matter, and then that's always there. And it's almost just like this play that is going on, whereas like consciousness is always there. Just like you said, you store the body, but the soul still exists, which is then connected to probably like an oversoul or a larger group of like consciousness that is even like your one fractal part of that larger thing. Yeah. And so when we talk about some of this technology, maybe it's the way, like, is this like a way now that we have evolved through like our understanding to connect with that or harness that on a deeper level, which I think you would say is probably like in nature already. You know, like that ability is there.
We just don't train it.
Exactly. But exactly.
There's obvious psychic abilities. Yeah. There's obvious stuff out there.
Well, it's funny too, because we were talking earlier, I didn't bring this up, but there's this I don't know if it still exists, but at Duke University, which is like 30 minutes from here, which is obviously an esteemed university. I went to Wake Forest, so I'm not a fan of Duke. But anyway, a rival school. But there's a school of I think it's the J.B. Ryan School of Parapsychology there. Mm-hmm. And for decades, they've been studying, which I guess what you call like psi research or parapsychology research. Yeah. And this nature, of like, I think there's this guy named Dean Radin, and he wrote this book about it. He's kind of like chronicled this field of study at like an academic level. Mm-hmm. And he talks about, they did, and I'm going to misquote how they did it, but they did some experiment. This has been like probably 40 or 50 years ago with, I think it was like one of those rooms that people could see outside of, and then you could see in, or like the people outside could see in, but the people inside couldn't see out. And they were like, would tell them like to think of a card or something like that in a deck of cards. Mm-hmm. And then they would draw that card. And then there ended up being like some statistical significance to which that person could guess the card of like some people. And I think what it was doing is like they would have the person behind the wall, like think of a card.
Right.
And then that person would draw the card. And then statistically, like it was like beyond statistical significant it was not random, like that card.
So they had somebody influencing another person to think about that card, even though they couldn't see it.
Correct. Yeah. And Makes it's sense. Like when you look at that, and this is like being studied from a very academic perspective, not like, just like some person that's just like, just spouting off whatever and saying that there's some anomaly there. It's like very critically evaluated. Like there's something there to like the nature of like how consciousness is influencing these things.
Right.
And to bring it back to like what we talk about, which is like health stuff, which is like, hey, at some level, your consciousness is going to affect everything, and it's going to affect your mental health, your physical health, your emotional. So
what's objective?
Exactly. Yeah. So like what is subjective versus objective? Or is objective actually just downstream from subjective?
Right.
Like,
and there's mentalists that can like literally like illusionists, mentalist people that can actually distort your own inner perception of time.
Yeah.
It's just wild. Like it just makes stuff seemingly happen. What it's really just your consciousness is almost distorted or reflected or, pulled in a different direction.
Yeah.
So,
well, what's fascinating about that is like this distortion of time. Cause I think that's probably like we're kind of talking about here with like the Therafied device is, and I don't know what I just always say, like, I don't know what I don't know. And there's so much more that I don't know than what I do know, but I can go back to, I don't have this happen as much anymore cause I'm not a competitive athlete anymore, but I have like flashes of memories in my brain from playing football to like where I remember things in very slow motion, very vividly.
Like you're hyper aware of all the details within a slower context.
Yeah. I still have memories of that in my brain. And maybe it's just like maybe I'm like creating those memories in a way, of like, oh, that's what happened. But I still remember, and this is going to sound weird, so forgive me, but like there's instances of plays that I had when I was playing football. Like take for instance, for anyone that's like knows anything about football, like I played linebacker and like I played outside linebacker. So like there were times like I was a film junkie because like I was not the like most talented athlete by any means, like physically gifted. And so like my edge as an athlete came from muscle memory and film. Like I practiced so much and I watched so much film, like I could like intercept things before they would happen because I was so well studied. And so like, I remember for instance, like we were playing a game against Florida State and I remember so vividly, they came out in a certain formation that if the guy was like lined up in one way, there was only one play that they were going to run out of that. Yeah. Because of the guy, like it was basically like anyone that understands football will understand. If you don't, you probably just play along with me. There was like 3 guys to the field. And if the inside guy was up, there was only one play that they would run out of that. If he was back, that was like where their whole playbook came out of. But if there was one up, it was to set up the bubble screen for the outside guy to come. And the moment he lined up like that, I was like, I knew it was coming. And I told the corner, hey, like, get ready because I'm just going to go and trigger to this. And I still remember because the quarterback for them was Jameis Winston, who's played in the NFL and I'm pretty sure still in the NFL.
Yeah.
I remember looking at his eyes and it was like he was like 15 or 20 yards away from me from like the other side of the field, but like distinctly seeing his eyes because I knew he was going to throw it before he was going to throw that ball because it was automatic. It was just like catch and throw. And I remember him like letting go of the ball and like seeing his eyes like be so big. 'Cause he was like, oh crap. Like he didn't know that I was going to trigger that fast to it. And all of this is happening in the span of like less than 1 second, because it's like ball
so he had
snap.
the plan where the ball's going within.
Yes. Seconds. Like he knew like catch it, throw, but I knew like, I'm like outside 4 years off the ball, trigger to beat this guy from blocking me to get there. And
did you intercept it?
No, I didn't intercept it, but like for a bubble screen where I'm off the ball outside coming, I almost intercepted it, but I tackled the guy and it was like a tackle for loss and it was a loss. But it's so weird because like you can go back and like watch that play on film and it's like 1 or 2 seconds because it was just like a catch, throw, boom, tackle, over. But in my head, it's almost like, you know, you have like frames per second in a camera. Like
you almost can't think that quick. It's almost like
it was completely like involuntary, like subconscious movement of I saw that and there was like nothing in me. Like if I like go pick up my water cup, like I just said, hand, pick up water cup, where it was like all within the split of 1 second that happened, meaning that like I still remember in my head, like seeing all of that, like it was slowed down at like 50x slow motion. Wow. And then you get up and like, I don't even remember like what happened, but in my brain, I have the memory of like those 2 seconds, whereas like the rest of that day.
Kind of a blur.
Yeah, kind of a blur, like made me remember.
That happens to people in like car wrecks and other situations too, where everything just like slows down and they just.
It's so weird. And it's like, that's just one instance. And I have like several other of those that I remember from playing football, and probably just because of the nature of like being an athlete, because you're like so physically primed, but then also so like emotionally. And there's like, do you think there's like an electric charge to the fact if you have like 100,000 people in a stadium that you get like all of that electromagnetism from those people? They're like focused
energy.
Don't
need a study to kind of get that. I mean, you feel it. Like that's why people go to these events. It's like, it's a huge energy thing. You get everybody focused on the same thing. I mean, same thing with like religious, like in churches and like where people congregate and they're kind of all focused in and kind of their minds connect. It's a powerful thing.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. The only reason I bring that up is because you're talking about like the 0 point energy. And I think some people in their life, and I don't claim to like to know it, but like, I don't think, I wonder how many people have like had experiences in their life that have actually like demonstrated that to them. Cause I don't think a lot of people have, like, meaning that like they haven't like experienced something like that, but like kind of like I was just saying to you again, whether it was like me as an athlete or someone like that had like a car crash or something like that, there's this weird thing of like this like slow down, like of a distortion of time that again is like, you can't explain otherwise, other than the fact that we have like all these things that are like outside the bounds of what we would consider like normal parameters or physics or whatever it is. Yeah.
I mean, have you heard of like in Eastern cultures, the concept of like the little death? Have you heard of that concept? Yeah. So in, different cultures have their different way of doing it. Like in Tibet, for example, like after a monk's gone through like a lot of reflections and realizations and the time's right. And the, teacher like deems it. So what they'll do is they'll take him up and like pack his body in ice. And then basically they'd hit these dim Mach points, which are on the body, which is like, that translates roughly to like death touch. So they stop the lungs, stop the heart temporarily. So the idea is that once they're trained and they're prepared, they can experience life beyond the physical and mental, that like you can, while you're still alive, experience like life after, and then they jumpstart your system. And it's just such a balanced, awesome system to encompass a lot of complexity into simple archetypes, like wood element, liver, color green, season spring. Like it has all these like connections that like we can start to be pattern recognitionist in our body with as far as like what our body's demonstrating to us to learn more about it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's maybe it's a conundrum. Maybe it's just a catch-22 or whatever, is like you have on one side, before I got into like my whole life, I've been on this journey of just like being an athlete and trying to do everything healthy and like taking supplements. Like, when I was like 13, I was like, mom or dad, take me to GNC because I want to like get supplements to like help me, be a better athlete. And that's kind of like through my whole life journey has led to what I do now. But it's like, to what you were saying is I think about just take like a peptide like tirzepatide or retatrutide. I know cognitively speaking, obviously there's a whole host of benefits. Cognitively speaking, I am much more sharp. I'm much more aware. I'm much more in tune. and I would even say much more consciously connected because there is less inflammation in my body.
Right.
And so maybe there's like long-term, like potentially like negative things. I don't think so if you're using them intelligently, but if you don't use them intelligently, there's definitely negative things that could.
Anything.
Yeah.
Difference between medicine and poison is dosage. Right?
Exactly. So there's like this whole, if you use it intelligently, it could potentially enhance all those things. And so I think we have a lot of people that are either like on this one side of the spectrum, which is like, I'm just going to use chemical enhancement to get what I want out of life. And maybe that's to be more 3D and less consciously connected.
Yep.
But then there's the other side that's like that only want to do kind of like the natural thing of like, oh, I would never touch that because like I've got this. And to that, I would say like, I'm all for that if that's possible. But then it's also it's like a lot of these things are in our consciousness. Like the instance that we chose to iterate here happened to be one with peptides. And if you use those intelligently as tools, I think they can, alongside those other things, like bring you back to a lot of the ways that maybe like in today's age, it's much harder to do, not impossible, but much harder to do given what we're exposed to on a regular basis. And that's where I think like hopefully kind of like when we started, like set out to like bridge is like you can use all of those natural things and then even a lot of these like new things, but they're not mutually exclusive in the way that, you know, like.
Yeah, it's not like you have to pick Eastern style or Western style. I think there's this beautiful integration there that like, I mean, if you know how to intelligently use all these tools, you're just going to be that much more better off because you're getting the nature intelligence, how it complexes all this insane chemistry and how it stabilizes everything. So all these peptides actually signal more clearly and better within your biology because it's dependent on, and I think probably the closest analogy is like making sure your hormones are dialed in before like even the peptides, because if the hormonal state's imbalanced, you're not going to feel the effects of the signaling from these like the software that we call peptides, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. If your computer is really old or even like parts of the computer are really old, and then what are the peptides going to do if you're trying to run new software on old hardware? It's interesting. I was at this conference and there was a retired priest speaking. It was actually a conference for doctors. And there's this really cool guy, this like retired priest that was speaking, and these were all HRT doctors. And I was there talking about peptides, but he was kind of talking about like more on the journey of like being kind of like a frontiersman and on the cutting edge of stuff from more of like a metaphysical perspective. Like you're going to be up, like if you're on the frontier, you're going to have resistance.
Totally.
And he was talking about, this is fascinating because I admittedly never even looked this up. The first guy to like discover testosterone, I want to say it was like in the 1880s. And we didn't even really know it was testosterone then. It was actually, I think, a guy named Charles Sicard. And he isolated glands from bull testicles and actually injected them into himself. And what he noted was that he had renewed vitality. Like he was basically like getting the like lightest version of TRT back then. And he was an old guy, the scientist experimenting on himself, isolated like bull testicles into like a mix that he then injected. Wow. And he had like all this renewed vitality. And guess what? Everyone called him crazy. You're nuts. You're insane. And he died. And it never even like took off.
I mean, honestly, it does sound kind of crazy.
I mean, think about it. Even today, it would be crazy.
Bull
it's
nuts
like,
and just inject it.
Yeah, just inject it. But what was funny is he was like scratching the surface, and he was a doctor, every single like professional governing body.
He was like ahead of the curve.
Yeah, he was thinking of like, how can you renew vitality as a man? Because in old age, like you didn't have the same virility that you did in young age. And what he was really doing was like he had just isolated testosterone, albeit like a very crude, poor form, injected it and got some of those subjective benefits of it. And then it would be, I think, like 40 or 50 years later that we actually like, I think it was like the 1930s or something, like isolated it. And even then it was still considered like, you know, crackpot witchcraft type science, even though it was scientists that were working on it. And then here we are today to where we're like in this continual, and I'm sure 50 years from now, we'll probably look back on the field of hormone replacement and be like, wow, like look how far we've come.
Aren't they synthesizing them from like wild yams now?
Yeah. So yeah, that's like where the raw materials, particularly it may be the case for injections, but I know for a fact that the creams and the transdermals, that's where they come from, is just wild yams. So it's kind of funny to like think okay, like for people that would be against hormone therapy, but in reality, yeah, sure, there's like excipients and stuff that you have to put into it to make it like chemically synthesized to be able to like put into a container that you would then use.
Yep.
But that's like the raw material. So in one way, it's like, you know,
then you filter it out. I mean, it's usually pretty purified in this day and age, I would imagine.
Yeah. So it's kind of crazy to think again, like you never know it in that moment of time, but like, what are we doing today? Whether it's like Blushield or Arc or some of these things that like 50 years from now, we'll probably accept as like, oh yeah, that's like commonplace now. We have 5G, we have these things, we have things to protect against them. It's commonplace. You do it just like you weight train and you do cardio and you get sun. You would use a PEMF device to build the electrical resilience field within it. And so it's kind of one of those things, like if you're on the frontier of a lot of this stuff, 50 years from now, we'll look back and be like, oh, those were the people that were pushing it forward. Yeah, sure. There's probably some stuff that we all got wrong. Maybe some peptides that we probably thought were like better than they really were, or worse, you know, like they ended up being worse than they really were. But I think it's one of those things that it's like, there's always going to be like, when you're on the cutting edge of stuff, there's always going to be like this, like figuring out phase that we're just kind of scratching the surface, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. And what's nice about the Arc is it's so much physicality to it with the magnetism that people subjectively just feel it. Whereas like with Therify, it's like very more subtle, even though you feel the charge. I mean, the electrostatic charge is undeniable and everybody just goes flat parasympathetic, like within like 3 minutes usually. Even at like trade shows when we're at like loud fluorescent lights, people are on buttered coffee and all kinds of stimulants. And they just go out. It's wild to see. But like I see that even further into the future as far as cutting edge, simply because if you look at how your body is interacting as part of the circuit, it's like a mind interface. Yeah. So it's a consciousness amplifier. So if you're doing Qigong, moving energy in your body, we've heard wild stories about like people that do kind of astral projection stuff. And of course that's all anecdotal. Like we're not saying any of that stuff. It's just because you're tuning yourself into that circuit that's constantly balancing for zero and creating these vortices and these torsion fields that are churning the ether, basically. It acts like a mind amplifier, a consciousness amplifier, which is what I've noticed as more of a long-term user. Because I've had mine since before, you know, Paul and I became friends back in, I think 2018 or 2019, I think.
Yeah.
So I've had one for a while.
Yeah. This is a random weird question, but as you were saying that, it made me think, do you find yourself, maybe like being psychic is the wrong word because there's a lot of negative connotation with that. Do you find yourself more psychically primed or more intuitive, I guess would be a better word, like when you're doing all those things? So you know how sometimes you're like, oh, I thought of this person and then they called me, or
like these synchronicities.
Yeah. Like all the synchronicities. And what I've always thought about that is like, those are going to happen and it's your consciousness that dictates whether you witness them or not and like pick up on them.
That's a good point.
But it does seem like when you were doing that type of work at that level, that it amplifies those experiences. And then it like there's so many like non-explainable things in my life that I would say like, how did that happen? But it was almost like the effect of like doing that type of work then had this downstream consequence that it doesn't feel like lifting a weight and your muscles get bigger, but then in a way it's like, actually that's kind of what is happening at a metaphysical level.
And you're asking if that's happening just vicariously of lifestyle independent of consciously training it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I mean, I think most people, I think our inherent state is that interconnected. I think we have these abilities, just most of it's dormant. And I think we get glimpses of it through dreams or synchronicity or things happening. You think about somebody that calls. I think that's just it's super normal. I think knowing people that actually have real skills in certain regards and to what you're speaking to and the training and meditation that goes into it, I believe it to be, as far as like to have it overtly advanced, is it takes training. Like, I don't think you just put a Blushield in or do an Arc or like lift weights or take anything. And really like it's, those are just tools and substrates to kind of keep the foundation primed and healthy and balanced. And really the consciousness work is only an internal art.
Yeah.
So you have to actually work at it and develop it. And that takes training.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
For someone that is like brand new to that world, but maybe they're like hearing this and they're like, I kind of want to see if that like plays out in my life. Would you have any recommendations for someone that like maybe has never even like scratched the surface of doing that? Is there a way to like get involved with that so that they can like begin to go down their own rabbit hole?
First, set the intention. That's what you actually want. Because if you can see stuff that other people can't see and do things that other people can't do, it comes with its own weight. So be real about like your intention. If your intention is that, just start getting into the arts. Probably start with like Qigong, like find a good real teacher. And it's going to take a while to get your legs. I mean, it's like a child growing up. These kind of skills don't come overnight, you know? Get into like some kind of Qigong, learn how to like sense energy. Something you can do at home that you can take away from this podcast is just like I like to do standing meditation. A lot of people do the traditional sitting meditation. I like the standing meditation. Look up people doing it right, where you have the knees slightly bent, you're upright, your spine, everything kind of like positioned properly. And the idea, it's like a dissolving technique. So what you do is you just like scan your body with your mind. You're just standing in the morning, just start 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day. But what you'll notice is if you're just standing still in proper form, because form is everything, you'll notice that like, oh, mate, I'm getting tension in my shoulder, and then you consciously dissolve it with your mind and relax it. And you'll notice where you're holding tension and stuff. This is like harmonizing the mind. This is great for, anything from sports or tactical application, martial arts. You're harmonizing the nerves in the body. So you're actually using your brain to scan. So you're using your consciousness to scan where you're holding tension, and you just become relaxed. That's the fundamental first phase, is just like learning how to be more relaxed consciously, not just like I take this thing and I feel more relaxed.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people do that. Like sometimes when you ask people like, what's bothering you? They don't actually know. They just know something's wrong.
Something's wrong.
It's like, and until some people don't even realize like there's parts of their body where they have this tension that is causing issues, or maybe they think it's one thing and it's actually like completely the opposite, or not even the opposite, but like something that's even different than that. Like maybe their back hurts, but it's like, oh, like their hamstrings are really, really tight. And that's then causing.
They're not paying attention to it.
Yeah. And exactly. Cause you're in the monkey mind and you're not aware of it. And so I think that's like one of the first things people can do is just like you said, just be present and aware with your body and start to listen like, oh, I might have some of this here and some of this there. And then you can't work on things until I have it. It's like the person, it's the composite or the avatar of a lot of people that I see that they load up and buy 20 different peptides and they don't even know what to do. They're like, oh, well, I want to use this. I want to use this. I want to use this. They're like, well, if you don't know what the goal is, you can't actually even do anything. You could try, but you're probably not going to get good results if you don't actually like have an intention about what it is that you're trying to achieve.
Goes to show how much the mind and consciousness is interplay. And we have you don't need a thing to do what I just said. You don't need to take anything, but we have tools like the wild reishi caps and stuff like that, or we make traditional incenses that are formulated just like 5-element theory, yin and yang theory, just like a medicinal formula, but in a burnable, most combustible things when you burn, like most instincts of animals or anything would be like, oh, fire, run away. But this has a calming the nervous system effect, and you actually get the stuff and allows you to go into a deeper level of relaxation through those modalities. That's why it's been used traditionally for like thousands of years at this point.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I wanted to circle back to some of the herbal stuff because I'm fascinated by that. And like, just for instance, like talk about this. I want from like an herbal perspective, because I think people get like overwhelmed. They're like, oh, I wouldn't even know what to get or like what to do or like how to stack certain things or whatever. What would you recommend for someone that's like, hey, maybe I want to like add in some of these medicinal herbal things into my life? What's like a good way? And maybe there's like buckets of things of like, hey, the reishi might work for this certain instance, or things that might make you more coherent or help you sleep better. What's like a good intro for someone that's new to that world?
I mean, so first, understanding the distinction of like medicinal herbs versus tonic herbs. So medicinal herbs are something that you use medicinally if you have like a certain condition, imbalance, if you have yin deficiency, if you have this, that, the other. You can actually take a formula that's customized for you. And this is traditional. They would, an acupuncturist or an herbalist would actually work with you based on your constitution, make you a specific formula. And once that, was remediated, you're off. So tonic herbs are something that has a cumulative beneficial effect. They're the hormetic response, like I was telling you about. They're dual directional. So in the case of reishi, for example, this is a wild reishi that's gone through a microfermentation, worked down by hand, traditional Japanese preparation. This has a body of flavor, which we always recommend people either opening up into tea or opening up straight in your mouth, because if you've tasted a lot of reishis on the market, a lot of manufacturing prioritizes time and efficiency, which makes sense. But if you do it low and slow in the old traditional ways, you get more of a bandwidth of, like, think of it as frequency. You get more flavors on the palate. So instead of just the high notes and the polysaccharides and the base notes, and where you get a little bit of bitter and a little like very high sweet point, you're actually getting a lot of that mid range too, because it's like full spectrum, and it's dismantled and transformed, I guess would be the way to say it, it's transformed in a way where it's stabilized and made bioavailable. Because if you were to take this off of a tree, you'd eat it. You wouldn't absorb anything of it because it just is nature, right? So it has to be processed in a certain way. And doing it in this way, you can actually take a capsule under your tongue if you want to right now.
Yeah, I'll do it.
And you'll just feel this calm wash over you. And I've never really felt that from any particular product. And again, this is like...
They just break on the capsule. And then...
that's what... here, I'll join you. They're really good. So I actually probably should have took one of these before the show. I don't know if you've had mushroom powders before.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this is a very famous mushroom. If you just sit with it, I mean, you can almost feel it starts like calm the nervous system down. You feel it back in the jaw, and then like
it's actually not like, because I've done this with like lion's mane. And this tastes a lot better than when I've done it with lion's mane.
You still get the bitter notes, but you get it like the complex, like polysaccharide fractions, beta glucans, all that kind of stuff. And when it's energetically intact, that's another thing. So you can look at the physicality of a mushroom. So you get these immune modulators. And you got to remember, these things adapted in harsh climates where moldy fungus, other funguses are trying to dominate the same compost material that it's breaking down. So it's got to create these medicines and compounds to fight off those other things.
Yeah.
You're basically interfacing this complex, incredibly... If you think about the signaling, it might not have a lot of chemical pressure, but it has a lot of chemical complexity. And that's why it's more of a load balancer. So if your immune system is sluggish or whatever, it'll boost it up. But if it's overactive and attacking everything, including you, because it's fatigued, it'll actually calm that down. It has this double directional effect. And actually 1 in 1,000 plant botanicals is actually considered an adaptogen. Like many plant botanicals that are therapeutic, medicinal, like garlic, like think of echinacea for the immune system. It's not double directional. It only has a stimulatory effect or otherwise in the body.
Yeah. It's fascinating. You look at mushrooms. There's this weird, obviously they're a little bit different from plants. There's this whole, and I know there's the old, it's kind of like the old Joe Rogan thing when I used to like listen to Joe Rogan about like talking about like how maybe like the advancement in human brain chemistry came from using mushrooms at some point. It's something like
or mycelium colonized the planet and allowed plant life. Yeah.
There is some like very interesting stuff when it comes to mushrooms and the innate intelligence behind them and how we can like integrate them into like a supplementation routine. I want to start using this, but I love lion's mane mushroom. Yeah. That has always been something that's like a really good nootropic that I love, but it also too like it's not like a chemical nootropic like a modafinil or something that would have that. Not that there's anything wrong with using modafinil. I think you can obviously use that for good effect too, but things like that,
and stuff like that.
Yeah, that are like that are having a definite effect on just like our outward expression of consciousness. So tell me about this one right here. Is this a little
I brought that
throat spray?
Yeah, that's a fan favorite. I want you to try it too. You have never tried this one, right?
No, I haven't tried this one yet. So
that's a new bottle. So you might need to prime it with a couple sprays, but like one or two sprays, and then hold it and then breathe through your nose. This is where one of the awesome ones, because like people that think that herbs don't work, this obviously works. Yeah.
So it feels good. I feel like I just cleared
the sinus.
Yeah, I just feel like it like cleared my sinuses because the one spray I was like it didn't do anything. And I get the full spray after it.
Yeah.
But no, that feels like I feel very like my sinuses. Not that I had stuffed sinuses, but it just kind of like opened my sinus cavity.
Yeah, we have 3 different flavors. This is kind of like the more potent. So Niniku means garlic. So it protects on a lot of different levels. And Chinese medicine is considered a formula that would clear the exterior. So a lot of your immune power, Wei Qi, is like found in the skin. So we want to affect the organs that are closest proximity to your internal organs. Your lungs are the most external, right? That's the closest proximity to external, and your skin, of course. So it's going to kind of strengthen the Wei Qi, and it's going to basically clear the exterior. So allow circulation and immune function to happen, but it's protective on a lot of different levels. And what's nice about the balance of this is that it's very powerful, obviously.
Yeah.
You can use it for acute situations. So if you have cold, strep throat, flu, or something like that, you can use it every 45 minutes to an hour until symptoms subside. And it helps like expedite how like quickly you get over something. But also it's safe enough and balanced enough to be taken as a tonic on a daily basis, because obviously we know garlic is amazing.
Yeah.
All the ingredients are really amazing for cardiovascular protection. So we call it Protect because it protects you on so many different levels, including like if you get a histamine reaction, bug bite, something, you can use it topically.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
the question is, if someone has a histamine reaction to their peptides, I wonder if I'm sure it wouldn't hurt to spray that on there for some people that like get like little hives or whatever. Sometimes after they inject a peptide, if they spray that on it, probably
we don't have a lot of peptide folks like trying these like traditional Japanese herbs out. But
well, for all you people out there that sometimes if you get we all get them, the histamine reaction. Sometimes you take like a GHK. Some people take like a CJC or whatever.
And that's just like a localized rash on the topically?
Yeah. So some people, it's not everyone. It seems to, I would say like the worst offender is probably CJC 1295, no DAC. And a lot of people have like a histamine response to it. Some people don't bother at all. Then some people, they'll get like red welts where the injection is. Sometimes it happens with tesamorelin.
And that's due to the compound, not the necessary quality, purity, potency.
Yes. So, and that's, sometimes it is like, depending on someone's reaction, it could be the quality of the sourcing, but in a lot of cases, it's just the nature of the compound for that particular person. And so I think it depends on a lot. It's probably like a genetic thing where some people have like a higher propensity for mast cell reactions to certain things. And then there's also it could be like an immune system thing where that person's immune system might already be like in an overactive state. And then it gets introduced to that. But I'd say
might preferentially like want to go the ghrelin pathway or different pathways to actually achieve the same result.
Correct. So that's why I always tell people too, like, especially if you're doing the growth hormone peptides, start with just one. Like usually like ipamorelin is like the safest because it's a ghrelin, GHRP, growth hormone releasing peptide, works via ghrelin. And typically that has a very, very low, if at all, like sort of immune response to it. Whereas the GHRHs like a CJC or a tesamorelin, those tend to have more of like an immune response by the nature of like whatever they're doing to the body, that people will get like welts or hives or whatever. And so a lot of people like, they'll just keep like Benadryl on hand, but I've seen it really bad where some people like have to go to the emergency room and have an EpiPen administered. And what's weird is like, I've seen this with tesamorelin too. People will use it for 6 months completely fine, like nothing's wrong. Then one day out of the blue, they inject it. And then all of a sudden they're like in the emergency room because they had an anaphylactic reaction.
Anaphylactic?
Yeah. Like full blown, like almost like die from it. And so
why not just get on the real recombinant then? I mean,
well, that would be always my contest is like, and I know a lot of people are afraid to go that way.
I mean, because there's probably like some kind of defense mechanism with the body. If you're like driving an aging gland too hard and you're pushing that button, it might.
Yeah, well, and there's that. And so it's like, at some level, like in a 75-year-old person, it's not going to work as well as a 35-year-old person because obviously that 35-year-old, their glands are more primed to be able to do the action that is needed for the effect via a peptide versus just the hormone itself. Also, too, we know for a fact with tesamorelin, because it's FDA approved, after a year, 50% of people will get a substantial, what's called an anti-drug antibody buildup to it, which is basically like the immune system reacting to it to like where it's neutralizing the drug. And that's because the immune system saying, hey, this is not natural. To me, that's why I'm like a big proponent of with almost all peptides cycling them, because if you do that, you typically will not have that buildup because you're giving yourself time on and off of it.
Right.
It's like where the body's exposed to it, then have this like extended period of chronic exposure to then you would like say like, okay, like I go on for 12 weeks or 16 weeks, then I come off, reset that exposure, and then you introduce it and the immune system is not like overloaded with chronic exposure.
I wonder if you could like have pairings. Like for instance, like when I think of like growth hormone or secretagogues, I think of like from an Asian perspective, like deer antler, like velvet and stuff like that. Because, you know, if you think about what it is, it's like an external limb that they grow back every year at 2 inches a day. So it's got like hair.
There's definitely some growth factors in there.
Vascularized, it's muscle, it's osteotissue. So it's like, it's pretty robust stuff. And that's why they look at that in nature, kind of like the bull, the guy with the bull. He's like, that's a lot of testosterone in there. Probably that's masculinity, at least as far as an archetype. So they see these antlers growing back and being shed every year and they start harvesting them and getting those growth factors. I wonder if there's like maybe a pairing where you have like the DNA, like modulation to where maybe you wouldn't have that anaphylactic aspect when you're layering in the peptide on top of that.
Yeah. Because at least it's like signaling to the body to like have that environment primed. If you're getting like, to the point of like the deer antler, probably like actual DNA through something like that versus, and then the peptide, which doesn't have DNA, but is also like a chemical signal that it would respond.
Right. And then you have the nutrient cofactors and all the complexity that comes along with that, which
at the very least is probably going to help you get the results better than if you didn't have those.
It'd be an interesting experiment.
Yeah. But then with the growth hormone as well, what's interesting about that is like with growth hormone itself, it's a bioidentical hormone. And so like, typically, not in all cases, but typically, the body's gonna have much less of an immune, anaphylactic, whatever type of response to something that it recognizes innately. And so if you give yourself growth hormone in the right ratio, like in the right amount, obviously you wouldn't want to do like supra physiological dosing. But if you're talking like 1 to 2 IUs, the body's like, oh, I know what to do with this. Versus like, oh, I've got this peptide. I don't know what it is. Oh, I'm going to use it to do this. And that's going to cause this, this, this. And then you get what you want. Versus like the growth hormone, it's like you don't really have that type of reaction because the body recognizes it. Now, it does start to not make its own. In that case, you do create a negative feedback loop. The growth hormone feedback loop seems to be much more resilient than like the reproductive hormone feedback loops, like testosterone, to like where that can take a longer time to recover.
Yeah, it just blunts it. I mean, you'd kind of die if it didn't come right back.
Yeah, exactly. Like it suppresses it, and then the body's like very smart, and it comes back. But to that point with growth hormone, it's like if you're using that, that's why I love the peptides, but I think the growth hormone itself, because it's like giving the body what it wants, versus
if you're already doing HRT, it makes sense as far as if you can keep it balanced.
Yeah, and then it's
cost. Yeah, I don't know what's more cost prohibitive or not, but.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, I think with the growth hormone, it's like people struggle to find sources for it. But then if you do find good sourcing, the cost ends up being about the same as
those peptides are pretty expensive, the secretagogues.
Yeah, especially with tesamorelin, which is more expensive. Like if you're going to use tesamorelin, which would be like the best one, versus growth hormone, you probably net about the same, but then you don't have to deal with those things. And I think there's, even for people that use growth hormone, you could probably use the secretagogues like situationally to achieve a certain effect. And there's probably even a good argument that you could make that like the secretagogues are like the HCG to testosterone to growth hormone. Like they kind of have that stimulation of like the natural feedback loop that's going on, so you don't get as much suppression. But yeah, it's fascinating to think about. And again, to think of like, even with those things, it's the story of growth hormone is even weirder. That was originally isolated from human cadavers.
Yeah.
So they were taking that from dead people and then injecting it. And luckily that's not what happens today, but
right. Because people were getting certain conditions.
Yeah, exactly. You probably don't want to be using too much stuff off of dead people. It's not probably best for the long-term health, but anyway, I know we're coming up on time. What I do want to do before we leave, and we'll make sure that we put this in the podcast, we're going to do a demo with the Arc device.
Oh yeah.
So we've got that over there. We'll just turn around and film that for a few minutes just to kind of show what that is. But just in closing, Brandon, thank you for being here. This was awesome. I think we covered a lot of ground, and hopefully it was at the very least entertaining for people, but hopefully educational, just to give them the kind of backdrop of everything that's going on, probably from the unseen perspective that's actually working on the body. So thank you. I can't thank you enough for coming out and being on the podcast. But is there anything just in closing for people to follow you, whether it's like through Blushield or Shen Blossom or any like personal social media stuff? What's the best way for people to find you?
So I don't have a centralized hub yet, but if you're into the EMF stuff, blushield.com with Blushield with no E, blushield.com. And then Shen Blossom is kind of all things Japanese, herb, traditional preparations, foods, body care, all that kind of stuff. That's like truly handmade, artisan, premium grade stuff. That's shenblossom.com, SHEN blossom.com. And then Arc is on there too. We kind of house the PMF stuff in there too. And then I work with Paul on the Therify stuff with which is vitality.com, like PHI, like the phi ratio, vitality.com. So you can find me at any of those places.
Awesome. And as always, I always say it at the end, thank you guys so much for being the best audience in the world. Just as you guys support me, just being on my email list, using my code at places, please go support the guest. In this case, Brandon, for even him just taking the time to come out. Please check out their stuff, give it a look, and potentially if it is something that you're interested or feel called to do, check that out. But again, just show the support that you show me to the guest, because he did take time out of his life that is very busy to come here and share with us. So that's it for this one. We'll see you with the next one. Make sure you go check Brandon out. And also too, we'll make sure you get the video of the PEMF device, and we'll put that in there. I'm here with Brandon, and we moved to the other side of the room. And so we have the Arc PEMF device. This is what I've been using, and I really like it so far. So Brandon, can you kind of tell us how this would look if someone is setting it up?
Okay, so basically, it comes with the box. So you basically can have this upright like it is or laying down. The important part when you start is that you want to make sure these NRF4 connectors are connected in the proper way. So in a single probe application, it'd be A port, B port, which the instructions are on here. So we get those clicked in. And then first thing you do is you turn it on. So this will get air flowing through the chamber. And this is a mechanical spark chamber. So you can control the pulse rate and intensity. It's interconnected, but you have the most control over a fully analog machine that is possible. So once you have it set, you set your timer. This one is set to 30 minutes here. And I'll hand this to you. Oh, actually, I should probably demo this because this is super important to know.
Okay.
So if you're doing like a necklace technique where you have it over and you're kind of getting these lung points on here and you're just loosening up the shoulders and neck, a lot of people have a lot of neck tension and, you know, Batman neck from the levator scap and all this kind of stuff. You want to start by getting the pulse rate. No matter where the intensity is, you want the pulse rate to be really fast. So you move it over to the fast position. And the easiest way to test this is you start it up. So you can hear it popping. So this is only about 50% intensity. So usually I like it anywhere from 50 to 70 for people to start. And the faster it's pulsing, you almost can't hear it now. This is subjectively less feeling. It's a very strong magnetic field if you were to measure it, but less subjective feeling. So what you would want to do is like kind of wrap this around your head gently, make sure it's not too intense. And then what you would do is you'd gradually increase the pulse rate.
Oh yeah, you can feel it. It feels like, you know, when you have a TENS unit on.
Oh, wait. Yeah. That's not silver necklace.
Must be something else.
All right, kids, this is what you don't want to do. Don't have metal on your body, like metal chains. So if that was pure, you wouldn't really get that reaction. But yeah, we're going over the neck. So you were sparking. I probably caught it on film. That's kind of cool. All right. We're going to pump him up again. Now we can go a little higher because he's...
Yeah.
See how it's kind of randomizing? It's not kind of consistent at these faster.
Yeah.
Is that uncomfortable?
It's not bad. It kind of, you know, probably for a long time it would be. It's intense though.
All right. So we're going to tune you down a little bit. So what's happening is basically you're getting a plasma arc that's creating a magnetic flux and it's going through these copper coils and basically overlapping and discharging, creating a magnetic flux, and that's stimulating his body to ring out at its own natural harmonics across these membrane gradients and cellular structures in the body. So for ATP production and electron transport and all these kind of like effects, and obviously all the famous effects of PEMF, bone healing, wound healing, tissue remodeling, all this kind of stuff. It's got a lot of cool stuff going on, but it's your body can never get used to that. That's the nice part of it. So it's like doing the same 10 push-ups over and over. It doesn't become hard. Yeah. A lot of machines, your body tunes out, or the magnetic flux actually bounces off the tissue. It doesn't get deep depth of field penetration.
Yeah.
So
from a practical, like how I'll feel after this, is there a difference in doing the slow versus the fast? Or is it all good? Or is it like, hey, if I wanted to feel more energized, should I do one mode versus like, do I want to like be more relaxed?
Yeah. To me, everything I've experimented with, it's all good. It's kind of more preferential. And we've kind of designed the knobs to be intuitive day to day. Some people put it on the same setting and just do that every single day. And then other people like to change it up. I found a friend of mine who's a chiropractor that actually uses this clinically. What she found is like she gets them started for the first 10 minutes on like really hard, like lymphatic pumping, you know, really strong contractions muscularly, muscle wise. And then she puts it on the higher frequency on the tail end to basically like kind of flush out the lymph and just, you have to play with it. But I find it to be very calming and peaceful when it's on like these hires where it's like barely noticeable. You get maybe a little like twitch or whatever.
Yeah.
So, but then a lot of times for lactic acid and all this kind of stuff, if you're recovering and healing, like that feels really good to get that mechanical tissue.
Kind of like get all the lymph out. It is like your body can't adapt to like, it doesn't get into a rhythm so that you're like always like, it's a new effect.
And that's only on like 50%, 55% intensity.
Oh, wow.
So it's a really strong machine. It's the strongest. So that's things that I was looking for within, you know, PEMF is like fully analog, modular control. But any of the old school analog, because it's not new. People have moved to semiconductor technology, and I can tell you all the reasons I'm not super stoked on that from everything I've experimented with and tried. I wanted the analog effect, but I didn't want to have to send it in for maintenance every like 200 hours.
Yeah.
You look at any of the analog machines, they get, you know, 100, 200 hours, then you have to ship a 45-pound machine to whatever state or whatever country. Just didn't make sense. So we just overbuilt everything. This is 100% USA made. And again, it was like a machine that I wanted for myself, and I found the right people, and we just had to make it because it wasn't available on the market that I could find. So
yeah, that's the best way to do it. Is figure it out for yourself. And then if it works, then just say, hey, if anyone else wants to try it, come get one. So it's awesome. And we'll definitely like put the links and everything down there for people to check it out and stuff. But I highly recommend it. I've been using it and it is awesome so far. So, all right. Well, that's it. We will see you guys on the next one. And again, make sure you check out Brandon. Check out this amazing device and go support.